Hey guys, tonight we're going to fall asleep slowly winding our way through dimly torchlit Roman streets, the kind that smell like olive oil wet wool, and just a hint of something rooty simmering over a distant hearth. You're walking with soft sandals on sun-warmed stones past marble columns and crooked alleyways towards something unexpected, a humble vegetable that somehow wormed its way into the political heart of an empire. Yeah, turnips? You're about to find out how Rome, bloody marble-proud Rome, was secretly obsessed with turnips. And not just eating them. Oh no, we're talking speeches, statues, full-blown vegetable poetry. You probably won't survive this without a yawn. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken slowly the city of Rome, already murmuring around you. Soft hooves clop over cobblestones, a donkey brays like it's owed a debt, and somewhere a pot clangs against a hearth, with the authority of a senator slamming his fist on a debate table. Your head is foggy from last night's wine, or maybe from that final spoonful of turnip pudding, surprisingly good, though you'd never admit it out loud. You swing your feet down from the stone ledge where you've somehow slept through the sounds of the city getting itself together again. A curtain stirs in the breeze. The scent of charred garlic sheep's milk and damp limestone reminds you that life here is rarely glamorous but always memorable. The mission today? Straightforward. Kind of. Gaius, that charmingly opinionated senator who hosted you last night, posed it as a dare between goblets of spiced Falernian. Find me the turnip of Rome, he said, with the drama of a man who once wept during a debate about crop rotation. Not just any root. The most Roman turnip you can find. One with history in its skin, which admittedly sounded absurd at the time. But here you are, so you stretch, yawn. Pull on your tunic, now permanently scented with beeswax and old philosophy, and you step outside into the misty breath of a waking city. The sun hasn't broken through the sky yet. It lurks behind a heavy gray veil, letting mist hang low over the rooftops and curl between narrow alleyways. It softens everything: statues, shadows, even the piles of clay amphorae stacked beside cracked fountains. The Tiber murmurs nearby, low and lazy, like a god that's not quite ready to stir. Your feet pad over uneven stones as you make your way toward the Forum Boreum Rome's ancient cattle market. And these days, a chaotic overflow of produce stalls, squawking poultry, gossiping matrons and men, arguing over radishes as if they were land deeds. The early crowd is already moving sharp elbows, rough baskets, the occasional goat who thinks rules don't apply to goats. On your way there, you pass a small child dragging a stick and muttering a song to himself. You catch the words root valor and toilet, which either means he's a future poet or very confused about vegetables. You dodge a puddle that smells strongly of fermented olives and something less dignified. You pass a faded temple wall where graffiti shouts in red pigment, "Roma loves roots." Below it, someone has drawn a surprisingly accurate sketch of a turnip in a toga. You nod in approval. That's the spirit. Finally, you round the last corner, and the Forum Boreum unfurls before you. It's louder than a Senate meeting, brighter than you expected for so early, and smells unforgettable. There's the expected whiff of livestock dung and crushed herbs, but layered in is the aroma of sweatwood smoke and, yes, turnips. Turnips of all shapes, colors, and levels of confidence. You pause to take it all in. Sunlight is finally breaking through the cloud cover, hitting the dome of a nearby temple, and painting the market in hues of gold and copper. The stalls stretch into crooked rows. Linen canopies flap lazily above barrels of pickled onions, pyramids of eggs, baskets of figs so ripe they blush if you look too long. And then you see it. A veritable mountain of turnips piled like the spoils of some earthy conquest. Pale orbs. Gnarled limbs. Some look plump and cheerful. Others look like they've seen wars. And behind them, presiding over the chaos like a battle-hardened queen, is the vendor. An old woman. Patches of gray hair sneak from under her saffron hood. Her cloak is the kind of wool that's been repaired more times than the Republic. Her arms. Let's just say marble bust would be jealous. She glares as you approach. You pick up a turnip the size of a clenched fist. It's lumpy, slightly bruised, You feel an odd kinship with it. She doesn't say hello. Foreign, she says instead. You blink, just curious. She snorts, aren't we all? You set down the turnip. Point to another one, this one squat and scarred as if it fought off a wild boar and then took a nap. That one looks distinguished, you offer. She gives it a glance. Survived the floods of last spring, she says. Half buried in silt. Grew back stronger. It's seen more than most men. You buy it immediately. She wraps it in a piece of linen that smells like thyme and last night's smoke. As she does, she mutters, "Fools love olives. Dreamers love honey. Survivors love turnips." You walk away clutching the root like it's a relic. And in a way it is. Because the thing about Rome, if you hadn't noticed, is that it finds meaning in the strangest places. Marble columns, sewer deities, owls that blink at the wrong hour. And yes, roots that fed the forgotten. You cradle the turnip like it might start whispering state secrets at any moment. Its skin is slightly tacky, streaked with traces of silt and age, and there's a nick at the base where a worm once made a hopeful detour. But somehow it feels dignified, like it earned its place on your palm. Not because it's flawless, but because it isn't. As you slip into the current of shoppers, each more chaotic than the last, you can't help noticing how this route has you thinking already. You dodge a man shouting about mustard greens, squeeze past a table stacked with jars of pickled garlic, and nearly trip over a vendor who's fallen asleep beside his cart of ancient turnip wine. Yes, that's a thing. Somewhere behind you someone yells, "These radishes are for praying, not frying." Rome, as always, is being deeply serious about silly things and silly about serious ones. Eventually you find a quiet wall beside a chipped statue of Mercury that looks like it's seen better prayers. You sit, unwrap the turnip, and inspect it again. It doesn't blink, but it feels watchful. Like it's aware of the ridiculous journey you're now on. You can't help but think back to what Gaia said. That Rome is built on ideas, sure, but those ideas have to eat. You can't run an empire on metaphors and marble alone. Someone's got to boil something. And more often than not, that something was a turnip. Turnips weren't glamorous. They didn't get carved into victory arches or chiseled into aphorisms. But they endured. In stews and cellars and crates dragged across provinces. You could drop one on a stone and it would bounce. Mostly, you could feed a family or an army for a week if you had enough of them and a little creativity. Historians still argue whether Rome's obsession with such humble foods was practical or philosophical. Was it just the logistics of feeding millions? Or did something deeper root itself in the Roman soul, an admiration for things that grow where others can't? You bite the air thoughtfully, imagining Roman generals not with swords but with spoons. You make your way out of the market and down one of the quieter roads that loops toward the river. The Tiber is glinting now, lazily reflecting the ochre buildings that lean toward it like they're in on some joke. You pass a street shrine dedicated to household spirits. Offerings sit beneath it, bread crust coins, a wilted bouquet, and a single turnip perfectly balanced like an inside joke between gods. You stop. Look at it. Was that you? You mutter to your own root. It offers no comment. Nearby, a group of kids are playing with sticks and a half-flattened gourd. One taller than the others, and clearly the director of this chaotic theater, calls out, "I am Turnipus Maximus, defender of the pantry." The others cheer, then promptly betray him in a choreographed ambush. You almost salute. By the time you circle back toward Gaius's villa, the sun is climbing higher, and Rome has hit full volume mode. A man is selling hot chickpea fritters out of a cracked terracotta pot. A woman yells something about laundry and treason. A cat watches everything from a rooftop with the serene detachment of a philosopher who just got tenure. You find Gaius in his garden exactly where you suspected reclined beneath the olive tree tunic. Loose sandals off humming what sounds like a love ballad to legumes. He doesn't look up as you approach. "Did you find it?" he asks, voice lazy, eyes closed. You place the turnip beside his outstretched hand. He lifts his head, peers at it like an art critic evaluating a fresco, then nods slowly. "Ah, that one has soul." You sit beside him on the stone bench, the warmth of the sun settling into your shoulders, and exhale. This isn't a day for hurrying. Gaius lifts the root, turns it over, then begins to monologue. "Of course. Did you know he says that Pliny the Elder, Plinius Secundus, that grand old sponge, once cataloged over 60 varieties of edible plants? You nod because of course you did. He described the turnip, Gaius continues, as both humble and miraculous. A crop of resilience. Said there was a variety so large in Germania it had to be harvested using ropes and pulleys. Picture it. Men with biceps the size of amphorae wrestling a root like it was a sea beast. He smiles to himself. Historians still argue whether he was exaggerating, or whether Germania simply had terrifying soil. You grin, or too much spare time. Also likely Gaius agrees. He sets the turnip down and props his feet up on a decorative urn. People think empire is made of roads and armies, but it's not. It's made of what goes in the pot. The mess hall, the hearth, the field at the edge of nowhere where a farmer kneels and prays that anything grows. He turns to you. Chickpeas are fickle. Onions make you cry. But turnips. You sigh the line with him. They endure. Gaius smiles. Exactly. You both sit in silence a while, listening to the breeze in the olive branches. Somewhere far off, someone is reciting a very aggressive sales pitch for coriander. A dog barks. A bird ignores it. And in that moment, holding your bruised, dusty turnip like a treasure, you understand what Rome already knew. Sometimes the things that look the most ridiculous are the ones worth trusting. Gaius stretches yawns like a lion and stands with the elegant ache of someone who thinks standing should be reserved for formal declarations or emergency evacuations. He gestures toward the modest stone kitchen attached to his villa. Come, he says, let's do something blasphemous. You follow him through the archway, brushing past a curtain of woven reeds that smells faintly of thyme and mildew. Inside the kitchen is half sun, half shadow. Light pours in from a narrow window, catching on hanging bundles of Herbs Bay rosemary, and what might be suspiciously legal wormwood. A clay amphora sweats quietly in the corner. On the hearth, a fire smolders beneath a dented iron grill. There's an elegant simplicity to it. No clutter, just tools, just food. You place the turnip down with ceremonial reverence. Gaius reaches for a jar of olive oil, its surface thick with dust and noble intentions, and says, "We're going to roast it. No vinegar, no honey, no theatrics, just heat, salt, and faith." You nod solemn as a minor priest on festival day. He peels the turnip slowly, the knife whispering through its skin, revealing the pale flesh beneath soft ivory with a faint purple halo at the edges. It's not perfect. That's the point. The little nick's the odd grain. This turnip tells a story whether you want to hear it or not. During the siege of Perugia, Gaius says soldiers ate boiled leather grain paste and when they were lucky turnips. Not because they liked them, because they could still be pulled from frozen ground. You blink. Frozen ground in Italy. He shrugs. Higher up. And desperate enough times will make even mild winters feel like barbarian campaigns. He tosses the chopped turnip into a shallow pan, drizzles it with oil and sprinkles sea salt from a clay pot shaped like a frog. Why, you don't ask. The turnip begins to sizzle, slowly, reluctantly, like it knows it's being made an example of. As it cooks, Gaius wanders into a lecture that sounds half rehearsed and half exorcism. The Senate has debated many things, he says, poking at the pan with a fork made of iron and opinion, war taxes, bread subsidies. But there was a time brief and delicious when they debated tubers. You raise an eyebrow. Truly, he insists. One senator argued that turnips should be distributed instead of grain during the food shortages. Said it would toughen the populace, build moral fiber, make the empire leaner, sharper, more resilient. And he lost. Grain had better lobbyists. The smell of roasting root fills the air earthy and warming. Not luxurious, not seductive, but satisfying, familiar. Like an old dog snoring in the corner of memory? Historians still argue whether Rome's use of root vegetables during economic downturns was a sign of resilience, or a symptom of collapse. Were they pragmatic? Or were they scraping the bottom of the culinary barrel with aristocratic flair? You ask Gaius. He lifts the pan, tilts it just so the oil glimmers, and says both. That's Rome. When the turnip is soft, just browned on the edges, not too mushy, not too firm. He lifts a piece to his mouth, blows on it, and pops it in. He chews, waits, nods. You follow suit. It's subtle, slightly bitter, a little nutty, soft but with just enough structure to bite back. Like a conversation that doesn't end in argument. You didn't expect much. That's part of why it's good. Now he says, licking his thumb the grum. He uncorks a small flask that should come with a warning label. The smell is immediate fermented fish salt, ancient dreams. He dabs a few drops onto your serving. You take another bite. The result is something. It tastes like defeat, you mutter. It tastes like Rome, he corrects. Sharp, unexpected. Too proud to ask for forgiveness. You both laugh. After the meal, you sit beneath the olive tree again, belly's full spirits softened. The light has changed. Afternoon leans toward dusk. Shadows lengthen like philosophical metaphors left too long in the sun. Gaius plucks a stray turnip leaf from his tunic and twirls it. You know, he says Pliny the Elder also warned that too much turnip could cause flatulence aggressive enough to offend the gods. Actual quote. Paraphrased, he looks at you, eyes tired but amused. Rome's greatness wasn't marble or gold. It was habits, fields, kitchens, cellars. Rome was built every time someone pulled something from the dirt and said, "This will do." You nod, until it didn't. Exactly. He lies back, arms folded behind his head. The root teaches us this: don't wait to be celebrated. Just grow. Quietly, stubbornly. And if someone digs you up one day, let them be surprised you're still sweet inside. The wind stirs the olive leaves above you. The world exhales. Somewhere, another kitchen lights its hearth. Another hand slices another turnip. The empire turns slowly, endlessly on the axis of forgotten food and remembered stories. And in that moment, you think maybe that's all anyone can really ask for. To be part of the stew. The next morning, you wake with a back full of olives and a mind full of questions. The bed, such as it is technically a pile of worn linen, stretched over a slab of something that claims to be furniture. Your joints protest like retired gladiators. The villa is quiet save for the chirp of distant finches and a suspicious dripping sound from somewhere near the atrium. For a moment, you lie still listening to the rustle of Rome, preparing herself, sweeping alleys, boiling stews, gossiping already. You still taste turnip. It's become a theme. You swing your legs over the side and reach for your sandals, which now smell faintly of herbs and mild regret. Gaius is nowhere to be found. Probably off reading Livy while eating olives out of a jar labeled emergency use only. So you do what any sensible Roman wanderer would do, you go shopping. Specifically to the Forum Holitorium, Rome's famous vegetable market, nestled snugly between temples and history itself. It's still early when you arrive, but the place is already alive. Noisy, aromatic, chaos in linen tunics. You duck beneath a hanging garland of garlic as a child with no sense of trajectory, nearly clips you with a basket of plums. A donkey stares at you with silent judgment. Somewhere a vendor is swearing vengeance on whoever invented parsley. And then you see them, turnips, glorious battered earthy things. Some squat and bulbous, others twisted like forgotten spells. They're everywhere in piles and baskets, hanging from hooks like medieval ornaments. You stop at a stall manned by a woman who looks like she's forged from sourdough and discipline. She's sharpening a knife with the kind of intensity usually reserved for debt collection. You point. How much? She eyes you. Depends. On what? She lifts a single weather-worn turnip and says, "On how badly you want it." You hesitate. Then you nod like this is the beginning of a duel and not a vegetable transaction. You haggle, of course. Because that's what Rome expects. The woman whose name turns out to be Lavinia throws out absurd numbers. You counter with something equally ridiculous. She pretends to be insulted. You pretend to walk away. She throws in a second turnip like it's a secret weapon. Eventually you settle on a price that feels like victory, but probably isn't. As she wraps them in a linen square, she says, "You're not from here." You smile. How could you tell? She taps her temple. Locals don't ask about the turnips. They just know. You thank her, and as you walk away, she calls out, "Boil it too long, and the gods will curse your soup." You're not sure if she's joking. Historians still argue whether the Forum Holitorium was merely practical, or something more an echo chamber of Roman values where food was trade tradition and theater all in one. Some scholars believe the market stalls acted like informal polling stations. The cost of onions could predict unrest. The shape of carrots forecast mood, and turnips told you how much Rome was pretending everything was fine. As you meander through the market, turnips in hand like sacred relics, you overhear snippets of conversation. Burnt the stew again. Don't trust a man who pickles things alone. Heard the emperor eats his boiled-in perfume. You pause. Wait, backtrack. A man with ink on his fingers and a scroll tucked behind his ears holding court over a basket of tubers. Perfumed turnips, he insists. Flavored with rose oil? Supposed to promote clarity of mind, or indigestion. Hard to say. He sees you listening and winks. You'd be surprised how many Roman elites will season vegetables with metaphors instead of salt. You nod, trying to remember if last night's pudding actually tasted like cinnamon, or simply grief. He gestures to the stall. These are from Campania, see the color pale, but with that faint purplish ring means they grew in volcanic soil. Stronger flavor, more bite. Better for stews, better for poetry. That tracks. As you leave him to his diatribe on tuber aesthetics, you round the corner and nearly collide with a goat. The goat, unconcerned, continues chewing what might be a scroll. You veer left, ducking under a canopy of drying herbs, and emerge into the quieter edge of the market. Here the vendors are older, less bark, more whisper. Their goods are simpler, humbler. And this is where you find a tiny stand, manned by a man who introduces himself as Felix because life's too short for a tragic name. Felix doesn't sell raw turnips. He sells what he calls root rations, little pressed discs made of grated dried turnip mixed with barley flour. He holds one up proudly. Soldier food, he explains. Hard as guilt lasts forever and tastes like the inside of a boot. You take one. He leans in conspiratorially, best softened in wine or anger. You buy a handful because what else are you going to do with your day? According to fringe historians, turnip biscuits like these were issued during military campaigns, especially in colder climates or long marches where fresh supplies were impossible. There's debate about their nutritional value. Some say they were genius, a compact, stable energy source. Others argue they were a morale destroyer, second only to being stationed in Britannia. You tuck them away, they might be useful later, or used as blunt instruments. With your bundle of roots, you return to the edge of the market and settle onto a stone bench. Around you, Rome spins. Merchants shout, children play. A dog chases a fishtail. You sit with your turnips and your thoughts. It occurs to you as you stare at the dirty but determined root in your hand that this city may very well be rooted upon mildly intended in vegetables more than virtue. Not because they're glamorous, but because they're always there. Because in times of famine, they showed up. In times of war, they boiled down. When the grain shipment stalled, or the harvest failed, or the gods went suspiciously quiet, and it was the turnip that stepped in, peeled back its leafy top, and said, "All right, I got this." You lean back. The sun has climbed higher. Your stomach grumbles. You're going to eat one of these. But not yet. For now, you just breathe in the scent of herbs and charcoal and listen to Rome hum. It's a hungry sound. You don't eat the turnip. Not yet. Instead, you walk. Because that's what Rome demands. It's not a city you can understand from a seat no matter how scenic or shaded. You have to wear down the soles of your sandals, navigate alleys that loop back on themselves, and dodge every pigeon like it's aiming for your destiny. Today, your destination is strange even by your now flexible standards. You're heading to a shrine. A small, out-of-the-way nook in the Aventine district, tucked between two old brick walls that seem to be holding each other up through sheer force of memory. You've heard rumors, whispers pass between market stalls and over sour wine that there's a stone there, etched with words so worn they barely hold shape anymore. A turnip stone. You didn't believe it at first either. The journey uphill is slow. You pass a laundress beating tunics against a marble basin like they owe her money. A dog naps in a wheelbarrow. Two lovers argue over a spilled fig. The air smells like vinegar and ambition. At last you reach the place. A courtyard choked with vines, half-forgotten statues, and the persistent buzz of bees who clearly aren't paying taxes. The shrine is simple. A low altar, a weathered stone, and a niche with an old clay lamp that flickers even though there's no wind. You step closer. The inscription is barely there. You squint. Rub your fingers along the grooves. Letters emerge slowly like guests arriving late. Rapaz va vite. Honor digne est. The turnip saved, it is worthy of honor. You exhale. Now this could be anything. A prank, a misreading, a poetic exaggeration by a bored priest on a slow Tuesday. But according to the old woman in the market and Lavinia, who you now suspect knows more than she lets on, this shrine marks the site of a great famine. One so severe that even the noble families had to stoop to peasant fare. Turnips were what survived, and more crucially, what saved. Historians still argue whether this shrine refers to that specific famine, or if it was built later as a symbolic gesture, a vegetable monument to resilience. A few fringe theorists have even suggested it was satire. a mock shrine meant to shame those who scoffed at root vegetables during times of plenty. You lean against the warm brick and consider the idea of Rome building altars to its groceries. Then again, this is the same city that deified emperors and gave sacred duties to geese. Nothing is off the table. A boy runs by trailing a reed flute and singing a song about goats. His feet are bare, his grin wide. He glances at you and your bundle of turnips, then points and says, "You going to offer one?" You blink. "Can I?" He shrugs. "I do. When I want my sister to stop hitting me." Practical theology? You unwrap the lumpiest turnip, the one Lavinia called distinguished, and place it gently at the base of the altar. It rests there, awkwardly humble but defiant. A vegetable offering. A nod of respect to the root that always shows up. As you back away, you feel lighter. Or maybe just amused. Either way, the air feels easier in your lungs. You descend the hill, slowly weaving back toward the heart of the city. Past ivy-draped balconies, laundry fluttering like tired banners and windowsills, where clay pots sprout suspiciously healthy herbs. The kind that grow best when no one's watching. On a whim, you veer left and end up outside a small tavern. The sign hangs crookedly, depicting a pig lifting a goblet. You're not sure if it's meant to be inviting or cautionary. Inside, the cool dimness is a welcome relief. A barkeep raises an eyebrow as you enter, then gestures toward a low table by the window. You sit. What'll it be, she asks, already wiping her hands on a cloth that's seen better decades. You hesitate. Do you have turnip stew? She snorts. It's Rome, of course we do. A few minutes later, she returns with a wooden bowl and a chunk of bread so dense it could be classified as architecture. The stew is simple chunks of turnip, a few flecks of meat, some wilted greens, and a broth that smells like smoke and memory. You spoon it up slowly. It's not glamorous, but it's warm, filling, and stubbornly delicious. You think of all the soldiers who ate something like this in far-flung outposts. Of farmers who stirred this same scent into evening air. Of widows feeding families with little more than hope and tubers. Across the room, a group of men are arguing about politics. Nothing new. One of them slams a cup down and declares we should go back to farming values. To stoic meals, to the days when men ate roots and meant it. Another replies, "You say that with a goblet of imported wine in your hand." They all laugh. But there it is again. The idea of the turnip as Rome's moral compass. A reminder that beneath all the marble and performance survival was built on what grew close to the ground. You finish your stew and lean back full and thoughtful. The city hums outside. The afternoon light filters through the window, catching on a dust mote that drifts lazily past your ear. You think about that shrine, about Lavinia, about the stubborn lump of a vegetable resting quietly on a centuries-old altar, and you wonder how many cities would honor a root. How many empires would thank something so simple? You rise, thank the barkeep, and step back into the light. The turnip, it seems, is teaching you something. Not just about Rome, but about resilience. About modesty, about what it means to endure. You head back toward the Garden of Gaius, where you suspect a philosophical debate about bean storage is already underway. And in your satchel next to the root biscuits and the linen scrap from Lavinia's stall, you tuck away that thought. Because you're starting to suspect the turnip isn't just food. It's Rome's last honest metaphor. The garden is as expected, full of opinions. Gaius is holding court near the fig tree, reclining with a cup of watered wine and a scowl that could sour grapes. Around him, a half-circle of acquaintances, philosophers, former soldiers, one poet who hasn't blinked in 10 minutes, are engaged in what sounds like a debate about state subsidies and vegetable metaphors. You don't even bother sitting yet. You stand at the edge, listening. And I say again, Gaius booms. If the people are eating imported saffron while the grain stores go dry, we've lost not just our stomachs, but our soul. A younger man scoffs. Turnips won't save us from inflation. No Gaius replies, but they'll remind us what survival smells like. You can't help it, you chuckle. It escapes before you can stop it. Gaius turns. Ah, our root chaser returns. Tell us, did you find a turnip worthy of the gods? You lift it from your satchel, the one you bought from the woman at the Forumborium. Its skin still bears the faint fingerprint of the soil, and there's a small nick in its side like a battle scar. Gaius takes it solemnly. Now that he says is a root with character, he sets it beside him as if it were a pet and gestures for you to sit. You do, settling onto a worn bench that smells of time and old arguments. The debate resumes. Someone's now suggesting a new system of taxation based entirely on vegetable yields. Another wants to measure civic virtue by how many turnips one can grow in a season. It's absurd, but it's Rome. And behind the jokes, behind the theatricality, there's something sincere. A need to ground these towering ideas in something humble. Something real. The poet, whose name might be Lucan, or maybe Lucius, it changes, depending on his mood, finally speaks. I think he says slowly, we love the turnip because it doesn't love us back. Silence. Then laughter. But you understand what he means. Turnips don't flatter. They don't blossom into song. They don't pretend to be more than they are. They arrive unannounced and slightly dusty and ask only for heat and salt. In a city full of people playing God's a root that just wants to be eaten feels refreshing, Gaius pours more wine and the talk drifts to war stories. One ex-legionary recounts how during the siege of a Gallic hill fort, they ran out of proper rations and lived off boiled roots scavenged from abandoned farms. Boiled turnips and prayer, he mutters, mostly the turnips. You ask if they seasoned them with anything. He shrugs, desperation. The group erupts again, but the laughter is softer now, wistful. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment. The garden hums with bees and the rustle of wind and fig leaves. Somewhere a pigeon coos from the edge of the tiled roof, and through it all the turnip sits like a silent guest of honor. Later Gaius beckons you aside. He leads you into a storage room cool and musty where amphorae line the walls like quiet sentinels. I want to show you something, he says. He pries open the lid of a low clay jar. Inside turnips. Dried, preserved, sliced thin and curled like papyrus shavings. I keep them like this for the lean months, he explains. Add water, olive oil, a bit of garlic, and you've got soup that'll shame a senator. You pick up a piece. It's light, papery, fragile. Gaius closes the lid and smiles. We store what matters. Gold for spending, scrolls for boasting. Roots for remembering. There's a pause between you. The kind only old cities and old men know how to make. Do you ever miss the front, you ask? He chuckles, only when dinner's cold. You leave the storeroom and rejoin the others just as the sun begins to slip lower, painting the tiles with long amber shadows. The talk has turned to dreams now, ambitions for children, regrets buried deeper than any cellar. You sit quietly watching as Lucan the maybe poet plucks at a lyre and hums a melody that could have been written yesterday or 100 years ago. Someone passes you a fig, sweet ripe and still warm from the sun. And the turnip now perched on Gaius's lap like a half-serious mascot seems to listen to it all. You realize how easily you folded into this world. A world where vegetables hold moral weight. Where humor and reverence sit on the same bench. Where food is never just food, it's lineage identity metaphor. You bite the fig. You think of the shrine. Of Lavinia's eyes narrowing. Of the shrine stone's faint letters and the way your fingers trace the groove of an old truth. And suddenly it feels less like a curiosity and more like a compass. Because if Rome teaches you anything, it's that the line between symbol and survival is thin. Delicate. Root deep. The lyre drifts to silence. The garden dims. And in your heart you begin to wonder, when did this journey stop being about the turnip? And start being about you? You don't sleep that night. Not exactly. Instead you lie on the guest bed in Gaius's domus, surprisingly soft. For a place that smells like parchment and pickled fish, and stare up at a cracked ceiling that looks like it's been sighing for 100 years. Outside, the sounds of Rome begin to dim. Distant footsteps fade. The last market calls drift into memory, and even the dogs seem to have stopped arguing with the moon. But your mind won't settle, because the turnip is still there, resting on the table beside you. Slightly bruised, faintly fragrant, radiating a kind of odd dignity. You sit up, light a lamp, and you think about what Gaius said, that Rome stores what matters? That roots remember, and you wonder how much has been forgotten. So at dawn, before the city fully wakes, you get up. You leave a note, well, a piece of charcoal, and the word "back soon" scrawled on a scrap of wax tablet, and you head out. Back to the Forumborium, back to the roots. The streets are quieter now. A few carts roll past, pulled by mules with opinions. A baker is just opening his shutters, the smell of rising dough chasing away the last ghosts of night. And a child races past you barefoot, chasing something you never quite see. You cross the Tiber, the bridge slick with dew, and reach the market as the first vendors are setting up. And you find her again, the woman with arms like carved wood and a voice like cracked slate. She's just begun laying out her produce onions that look like angry seashells' garlic bulbs, strung together like charms, and of course, the turnips. She glances at you without much interest. Back so soon, lentil man. You smile. I think I owe that one an apology. You nod at a turnip resting in a chipped bowl. It's misshapen, lopsided, stubborn. she snorts. You're not the first. And then without ceremony, she gestures you behind the stall. You follow. There's a shaded patch of canvas, a cracked bench, and a jug of something that might be tea or just water, pretending to be tea. She pours a cup. You sip. It's terrible. You love it. She tells you stories now, not because you ask, but because it's morning, and mornings are for remembering. She talks about her grandfather, a man who served in the legions and came home with more scars than teeth. He grew turnips for the rest of his life. Said it reminded him that even ugly things could fill a belly. She talks about the drought of '84, how the barley died, the grapes shriveled, but the turnips kept growing. Said the soil was too stubborn to quit. She talks about her daughter, long gone now, who used to carve little faces into roots during the winter, pretending they were guests at some imagined feast. Do you still have one, you ask? She nods. Buried in the yard. Turned to mulch years ago, still keeps the weeds away. You laugh, she doesn't. And somehow that makes it better. Around you, the market begins to bloom. Voices rise. Carts clatter the air, thickens with smoke and mint, and the ever-present bass note of garlic. But in this little corner, there's only memory and root tea. Eventually, she reaches beneath the bench and pulls out something wrapped in cloth. Take it, she says. You unwrap it slowly. A dried turnip, hollowed, varnished, carved with swirls and the faint suggestion of eyes, like a mask, like a relic. You look up. She shrugs. He called it his guardian of harvests. Thought it kept the pantry honest. You don't know what to say. So you bow in the clumsiest way possible and promise to keep it safe. You head back through the market, cradling the relic in both hands like a stolen truth. Vendors call out, children dart past, and somewhere a bard is tuning a lyre with the confidence of someone who has never actually played a lyre. And you realize something as you walk. You're not just collecting stories. You're becoming part of one. By midday, you're back at Gaius's garden, and he's just waking up robes askew hair like a startled mop. He squints at the carved turnip in your hands and grins. What no laurel wreath. You tell him about the woman, the tea, the relic. You describe the carving, the legend, the story of the daughter, and the winter feast. And Gaius listens genuinely with a quiet nod of someone who understands that most sacred things don't glitter. When you finish, he only says one thing. She should have been a senator. The afternoon stretches on. You spend it helping him sort his seed jars, an odd task, made odder by the fact that none of them are labeled, and one contains nothing but pebbles and a tooth. Eventually, the conversation drifts to Pliny again. Apparently, the elder naturalist once described turnips as an antidote to melancholy when boiled with wine and recited poetry. Historians still argue whether he was joking, but Gaius insists on testing it. So you sit beneath the fig tree once more, sipping warm wine infused with cloves and regret, while Gaius reads a poem he insists was found carved into the side of an amphora in southern Etruria. It's not very good, but it rhymes, and the wine is sweet. And the turnip on the table now has a companion, your carved relic, watching with its hollow eyes as if deciding whether your soul is worth seasoning. And as the shadows lengthen and the city begins to breathe its slow evening breath, you realize you're not bored. You're not restless. You're full of stories, of root tea, of a strange kind of joy that settles in the chest and says yes. This is what history feels like when it lives. By the time Gaius dozes off under the fig tree mouth, slightly open and wine goblet clutched like a battlefield trophy, the city is beginning to glow again. That late Roman kind of light burnished sideways, filtering through hanging laundry and curling over rooftops like it's trying to kiss every tile before slipping away. You ease yourself up, careful not to wake your host, and glance back at the carved turnip on the table. Still watching, of course. You wander, because Rome is best when walked without destination. The city hums underfoot a symphony of sandals on stone wheels, creaking under carts' pigeons arguing about everything and nothing. The air smells like olives and charcoal and old ambition, and you head toward the Subura. The Subura roams chaotic belly, home to butchers and booksellers, street preachers and gamblers, perfumers and philosophers who've lost their following but not their opinions. If the Forum is where Rome pretends to be ideal, the Subura is where it admits what it really is. Loud layered, a bit damp, and incredibly alive. You pass a laundress flinging sheets like battle standards, a baker pulling flatbread from a smoky oven with one hand and smacking a greedy dog with the other, and a cluster of children holding what appear to be turnip puppets. Yes, puppets. They're putting on a play. You stop. The stage is a crate. The props are turnips with faces scratched in charcoal, the plot. Something about a heroic root who saves Rome from a tyrant onion. You blink. It's both hilarious and alarmingly structured. One turnip speaks in a squeaky falsetto. But if we give the market to the leeks, what will the carrots think? Another growls, we must stand firm like stew left too long. A little boy narrates in a voice far too theatrical for someone missing 3 teeth. Thus began the great salad wars where all roots were tested. You sit on a crate captivated? These kids are too young to quote Pliny. They probably think Cato is a brand of sandals. But they're reenacting political allegory with tubers like it's the most natural thing in the world. And that's the thing about Rome. The turnip's power isn't just in its roots, it's in the way it takes root. It grows in metaphors and markets in memory, even in the hands of grubby children making up plays while their parents shout about overdue rents. You toss a coin into the box marked for props. One girl nods gravely. We'll buy more turnips. Of course they will. You continue on deeper into the maze. You pause at a vendor's stall offering street food skewers of something browned and salty. You ask what it is. Turnip cake, the vendor replies, sweetened with date paste, old recipe from the provinces. You take a bite. It's weird. A little like revenge, a little like home. And while you chew, the vendor tells you about his grandmother who used to make it during Saturnalia, when even the slaves got to wear the master's cloak, and the world turned upside down for a day. She said he adds that the turnip was the only honest guest at the party. Always showed up, never asked for wine. Historians still argue whether turnips were truly central to Saturnalia feast or if they were just convenient filler. But the idea persists it's a vegetable that shows up for every occasion, formal or feral. You move on cake and hand crumbs trailing like a breadcrumb trail for pigeons who may or may not understand pathos. The Subura begins to climb upward toward the Esquiline Hill. The buildings lean in on each other conspiratorially, their windows squinting in the fading light. And you hear it before you see it. A man drunk on something that probably wasn't taxed is singing a song. It's tuneless. It's poetic. It rhymes turnip with worship, which is a stretch but not unforgivable. He's slumped against a statue of Hercules holding what looks like a half-eaten root and declaring, this fed the empire. You pause. He notices. Tell me, stranger, he slurs. Can you taste glory in stew? You consider only when it's well salted. He laughs, offers you the root. You decline. He shrugs. More for the gods, then. He tosses it onto the steps of the statue and mutters something about sacrifices. You nod respectfully and walk away, leaving him to his offerings. The Esquiline flattens out, and you find yourself near an old insula, a multi-story Roman apartment block stacked like ambition on bad foundations. At the top, laundry flaps. At the bottom, a woman stirs a pot. You ask what's cooking. Turnip soup, she replies. Not because it's holy, because it's what I have. She doesn't smile, but she offers you a spoonful. It's thin, a little smoky, tastes like patience. And you realize again, this root isn't about fashion. It's about presence. It's about surviving every war, every storm, every corrupt governor, every bad harvest. It's about feeding the child and the senator alike, whether through stew or satire. By the time you make it back to Gaius's domus, the fig tree is heavy with shadow and silence. The lamps have been lit. The carved turnip still sits on the table quietly judging. You set down your street-bought relics, a puppet with string arms, the rest of your turnip cake, a tiny scroll sold to you by a poet who swore it was a recipe for happiness and probably just listed spices. And you smile. Because somewhere in that pile in the puppets and poems and puppet poems, you found something honest. Rome may be marble and myth and madness, but underneath it all, quietly, stubbornly, it's still root-fed. Morning comes slowly like a debtor sneaking past a tax collector. You wake to the gentle hiss of olive oil meeting hot bronze. Gaius is already cooking. The courtyard smells like garlic and something aggressively herbal. You stretch Blink against the light bouncing off the whitewashed walls and shuffle toward the kitchen like a philosopher in search of certainty or breakfast. Gaius greets you with a nod and a ladle. Stew, he says, handing you a bowl. Turnip again. But with some lentils this time. It's a moral improvement. You sip. It's better than it has any right to be. Earthy, salty, warm, like a hug from someone who won't make a big deal about it. While you eat, Gaius starts talking because of course he does. This time about the economics of food. Not the kind with charts and scribes and serious ink, but the kind that really matters what you can buy, what you can stretch, and what keeps when the roads wash out. He speaks of famines, how Rome, for all its pomp, was always one bad grain. Season away from real trouble. The Annona the grain dole was meant to protect the poor, but it couldn't always keep up. And when wheat failed, they turned to roots, he says, dunking a crust of bread into his bowl. Carrots, onions, parsnips, sure, but turnips most of all. Because they grow even when the gods are sulking. You picture it: cracked fields, wilted vines, brittle stalks, and then below the surface, stubborn little turnips quietly doing their job. Historians still argue whether turnip cultivation increased during famine years or if it just got more poetic mentions. But the archaeological record supports it: layers of root storage pits, makeshift clay pots packed with salted slices, tiny altars where someone scratched rapa into the stone. You think about that: a prayer to a vegetable. Not for glory, not for fortune, just for dinner. After breakfast, Gaius hands you a satchel and says, "We're going to the port." You blink. Why? To learn what the Empire really runs on, he says. Spoiler, it's not silver. You walk together down Roman Street, still yawning open for the day. The carts are out. The amphorae are stacked. The city smells like wet limestone and ambition. And then there's the Tiber, broad, sluggish brown as oversteeped tea. Boats bob along its back, moored like lazy thoughts. You head toward the Emporium, the great port market where everything arrives. Olive oil from Hispania garum, from Baetica wool, from Britannia marble from the east. And food, always food. You pass stacks of grain sacks, mountains of salted fish, baskets of fruit, dried herbs, jugs of vinegar, and yes, turnips. Not fresh ones this time. These are brined, pickled, dried, sliced into discs and packed in straw. Some look like wooden coins. Others have been mashed into a kind of paste and molded into crude cakes. They call those journey loaves, says Gaius, picking one up. Feed a soldier for a day, or bore him for a week. You raise an eyebrow. Taste. He grimaces. Like memory, and not the good kind. You try a piece anyway, because how can you not? It's chewy, sharp, faintly sour, not unpleasant. Not pleasant either. It tastes like practicality. A passing merchant notices you chewing and winks. Luxury stuff that. From Gaul? Boiled in mead, dried in smoke, kissed by druids, or some nonsense? Want to buy a crate? You decline politely. But you ask, do people really eat this often? He shrugs. Depends who you are. Rich folks can pretend it's exotic. Poor folks don't pretend at all. And that, it seems, is the crux. You find a shady spot by a stack of amphorae and just watch. Laborers hauling goods. Accountants scratching notes. Criers announcing auctions. Slaves fetching orders. Seagulls making their case for universal ownership of all edible things. And through it all, turnips. Quietly present, humble, ridiculously resilient. You remember something Gaius said once: the turnip endures because it's boring. And boring things last longer than beautiful ones. There's probably a poem in that. Or at least a sarcastic epigram. You stroll along the edge of the market until you find a group of children playing a guessing game with different root vegetables. One holds up a knobby lump. What's this? Rotten pear? Elephant toe. Turnip, says a girl in teal confidently. You always guess turnip, and I'm always right. The others groan. She grins. You move on. Near the customs building, a mural stretches across the wall. Faded, chipped, sun-beaten, but still legible. It shows a procession: farmers, traders, scribes, cooks. All carrying something: wheat, olives, amphorae. And near the end of the line, one man holds a turnip, high like a trophy. You tap Gaius. What's that about? He smiles. That Cinna Minor used to say, "I feed Rome with fists of dirt." That turnip's a symbol of stubbornness, of staying, of being useful when others fail. You pause, because that might be the best compliment you've heard all day. Back home after the walk and the dust and the strange aftertaste of pickled legacy, you collapse into a bench in the garden. The air is cooler now. The olive branches sway like lazy dancers. Somewhere a dove coos. Somewhere else someone drops a clay cup. You look at the turnip still sitting on the table from yesterday's market. A bit shriveled now, but still there. You reach over, draw a little face on it with charcoal. Just 2 dots and a line. You nod. It understands. You sit with your back against a sun-warmed column, the weight of that ridiculous turnip face still pressing a gentle amusement into your chest. Somehow this root, this stubborn, silent little orb, has followed you through half the city and back again. From markets to temples to symposiums and port warehouses, it's been there quietly whispering, "I belong here." Now Gaius shuffles out from the kitchen holding 2 small clay cups of something that smells medicinal and slightly suspicious. You like vinegar, he asks. Define like it, you reply. He chuckles and hands you the cup anyway. It's Posca diluted wine vinegar, the ancient Roman version of electrolyte water. Soldiers drank it. Laborers drank it. Everyone not rich enough to waste wine drank it. Tastes like regret and hydration. You sip. You know, Gaius says, taking a seat beside you, some claim turnips can be used to ward off evil spirits. Carve a face, set it by the doorway, light a candle inside. You raise an eyebrow. That's oddly specific. Exactly, he grins, which is how you know it's true. Historians still argue whether this was a Roman superstition or a later folk tradition grafted onto the past like so many questionable statues. But it's plausible enough. Rome borrowed beliefs the way it borrowed gods, freely, creatively, and often with a splash of wine. You sip again. The sourness grows on you. Gaius leans back, staring at the sky through the olive branches. Want to see something, he asks. You nod. He gets up slowly, his knees popping like old scrolls, and beckons you toward the storage room. It smells like dried herbs and vinegar-soaked thyme. He lifts the lid of a small wooden chest and reveals a collection of turnips, dried, carved, pickled, flattened, smoked. Some hollowed out and filled with wax, others daubed with ink. A few with tiny lead weights embedded in the base. Souvenirs, you ask. Artifacts, he replies. From festivals, from meals, from weird afternoons. This one he holds up a particularly gnarled specimen was carried in a parade celebrating Ceres. Got stepped on by a donkey. Still made it into the stew. You squint, and the weights. Oh, for rigging the Senate's turnip vote theater. You didn't think that was spontaneous, did you? You grin. I wanted to. Gaius returns the turnip to its resting place like it's a sacred relic. He's half joking, but not entirely. Back in the courtyard, he starts talking about Saturnalia. Now, Saturnalia is the Roman holiday that makes all other holidays look like amateur hour. Feast, gift-giving, gambling, social role reversal. Slaves dining as kings, masters serving them streets filled with singing and far too much mulled wine. And yes, turnips. People used to carve them, Gaius says. Use them as joke gifts. One year a senator I knew got 25 turnips from different friends. One for each speech he gave that session. All hollow. You blink. That's either deeply insulting or impressively committed. Both, he nods, which is peak Roman humor. There's a kind of quiet admiration in his voice. For the vegetable. For the people. For the absurdity of tradition and how it somehow persists like moss in the marble cracks. He's not alone. You recall overhearing two market women a few days ago arguing over whether to use salted turnip brine as a hair rinse. One swore it made her curls bounce. The other said it attracted bees. Truth is probably somewhere in between. You wander the garden as the sun leans lazily westward. Bees hum around thyme blossoms. The air smells of rosemary and memory. You pause by a mosaic embedded in the courtyard floor. It shows the goddess Tellus reclining with a horn of plenty in one hand and a wheat stalk in the other, but there tucked in the corner, barely visible what might be a turnip. You look closer. It's small, rounded, etched with care. Purposeful. You call Gaius over. He squints. Well, I'll be. I've stepped over this for 30 years and never noticed. Think it's a coincidence. He laughs. There are no coincidences in Rome, just very quiet declarations. Later, as the sun dips and shadows stretch their limbs, you and Gaius prepare a simple meal. Barley flatbread, lentils, and you guessed it, turnips. These are roasted with honey and thyme, then dusted with a pinch of black pepper. You sit side by side, plates on your laps, and eat slowly. Did you know Gaius says chewing that Emperor Claudius once claimed turnips helped him sleep better? Said the root held dreams. Soft ones. Sounds like something he'd say, you reply. Also sounds made up. You both nod. Historians still argue whether Roman elites actually believed in the medicinal powers of vegetables, or if it was just another layer of theater. Either way, someone wrote it down, so it lingers. The meal winds down. A candle flickers on the table. Somewhere in the distance, a flute plays an uncertain melody. The breeze carries it like a passing thought. You take the carved turnip with the charcoal face and place it gently on the ledge beside you. Good day, you murmur. Its grin doesn't change, but you swear it understands. The night presses gently against Rome like a wool blanket that's been around for generations. Slightly scratchy, but warm and familiar. You sit there with Gaius, both of you full from dinner, and heavy with the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. The flicker of the candle casts long shadows on the courtyard wall, stretching the carved turnip's grin until it looks almost philosophical. You ever wonder, Gaius says softly, why the humble things last the longest? You tilt your head waiting. I mean, you don't see anyone making epic poems about lentil paste or barley biscuits. But turnips. Somehow they keep popping up in stories and jokes and shrines, even in the Senate. You nod. Maybe it's because they don't ask to be important. Exactly, he replies. They just are. You linger with that thought a moment watching as a moth flutters lazily around the candle. The air smells faintly of beeswax, old clay, and roasted thyme. Rome is mostly asleep now. Even the dogs are quiet. The conversation turns, as it often does in this city, back to stories. Did I ever tell you Gaius says about the time a gladiator tried to bribe the game's manager with a barrel of pickled turnips? You stare. That feels like something you should have led with. He chuckles. It was during a dry season, grain prices, high wine scarce. Turnips, though, bountiful. He thought he was being clever. You raise an eyebrow. The manager was insulted. Not because it was turnips, mind you, but because they weren't peeled. Said if he wanted bribes, he expected at least a little effort. You both laugh, then pause. Because, yeah, that checks out. Historians still debate whether turnips were ever used as currency in Rome. Not officially, of course. But unofficially, through barter bribes or favors, the odds are strangely good. After all, in a system powered more by favors than coins, a barrel of well-pickled roots could buy more than you'd think. You lean back, tracing the outline of a cracked tile with your toe. The villa creaks softly in the night. Somewhere above, a lizard scuttles along the roof tiles. Gaius leans over, elbows on knees. You remember the tale of the three-root prophecy. You shake your head. Oh, it's ridiculous, but wonderfully so. A farmer supposedly during the early Republic found 3 enormous turnips in his field, one morning each of a different color, white, gold, and blood red. You blink. That already sounds suspicious. Right. But according to the tale, a traveling augur happened to be passing by. Saw the roots, fell to his knees, and cried out that they were omens. What did they mean? Well, naturally, the white root symbolized peace, the golden one prosperity, and the red one war. Classic setup. And the farmer did the sensible thing, he cooked them all into a stew. Shared it with his neighbors. That evening, they all had vivid dreams. Some saw fields of grain. Others saw battlefields. One saw himself turning into a goat. You stare. That's specific. Roman dream logic. Gaius shrugs. Anyway, the prophecy didn't come true. Nothing happened. But people kept retelling the story just in case. You think about that. About how so many of Rome's stories are like that half-truth, half-tradition, passed down with a wink and a shrug. The turnip again proves itself a flexible canvas. Just edible enough to be real, just weird enough to be memorable. Gaius gets up and disappears for a moment. You hear the clink of amphorae and the soft rattle of a lid. He returns holding a small dish. It's glistening with a strange jelly-like substance. Turnip preserve, he says. Made with fig syrup and wild mint. Recipe from a scroll attributed to some philosopher chef named Marcellus. You take a spoonful. It's odd. Sweet, tart, a little earthy. Not unpleasant, just unusual. Wouldn't call it dessert, you say. No, he agrees, but it's definitely the end of something. You sit there a while longer. The preserve slowly disappearing. The candle flickering lower. And then Gaius begins telling you about the cult of Saturn. Not the state-sanctioned Saturnalia, not the public feasts or the mock elections, but a fringe group long gone now that believed Saturn's blessings could be channeled through deep roots of the earth. They called themselves Rapinarii, he says, grinning. Wore garlands of turnip greens, had rituals involving moonlight chanting and very confused goats. You gape. That can't be real. He shrugs. Historians still argue whether they were a genuine sect or just the result of one really dedicated prank. But the story survives. That's what matters. You smile wide and slow. Because that's it, isn't it? Rome isn't built just from marble and battles and names carved in stone. It's built from things like this. Shared meals, quiet nights, strange vegetables with suspiciously long legacies, and people who tell stories because it helps them make sense of the chaos. You thank Gaius for the preserve, and the stories, and the pasca that still sits a little too sour in your belly. He nods, already half asleep in his chair. You step into the guest room, simple tiled and cool from the stone walls, and curl up under a woven blanket that smells faintly of laurel and thyme. Your last thought before sleep. You hope that somewhere in the archives of the future, a bored historian stumbles across a footnote. Something like, possibly the result of root-fueled delusions, but oddly compelling. And they smile, and they keep reading. You wake with a scent of basil and ash in your nose, soft morning light slanting through the narrow shutters. Somewhere nearby, someone is sweeping a courtyard with a straw broom. The sound is slow and repetitive, shh, 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 like a whisper, trying not to wake the gods. You blink up at the ceiling, which has a faded fresco of Mercury smiling down, lopsided and slightly smug, as if he knows what kind of day you're about to have. Outside, Rome stirs again. Gaius is already gone when you shuffle into the kitchen, replaced by a jug of fresh water, a crust of olive bread, and a tiny wedge of what might once have been cheese. You nibble it anyway because your stomach still hasn't learned restraint. Today, you're retracing the path of ancient produce distribution. Yes, really. Because it turns out that even in a city obsessed with conquest and philosophy, someone still had to figure out how to get a turnip from the countryside to your soup bowl without it rotting en route. So you make your way toward the river Rome's highway before roads got fancy. The Tiber's sluggish and brown smell slightly less terrible than usual thanks to the early hour and a recent rain. Barges bob at the docks loaded with sacks and barrels and crates, most of them shouting their identities in painted Latin letters. You spot one marked Brassicae, Iridium. Cabbages from Iridium, a good sign. Where there's cabbage, there might be turnips nearby. You stop to watch as a group of dockhands unload baskets. Some are grunting, some are singing. One is complaining loudly about the injustice of onions. "That one bit me," he says, holding up a sliced finger. Swear it. Saw me coming. A man with a chalk-smeared tunic and too many keys on his belt waves you over. He introduces himself as Sextus and proudly informs you that he manages one of Rome's vegetable distribution guilds. You blink, that's specific. Oh yes, he beams. We're the roots and stalksmen. Well, and bulbs, but mostly roots. Less fuss. He shows you a tally tablet covered in tiny scratches and smudged numbers. Today we're moving 72 crates of rapa, 2 dozen of radicula, and one of something the Gauls call bitter apples. But I'm pretty sure it's just an angry beat. He gestures to a cart. Want to see the prize turnip? How could you say no? It's huge. As in small animal huge. Deep purple at the top, fading to creamy white at the base with a slight gleam from the morning dew still clinging to its skin. It's nestled in straw like a sleeping baby. Grown near Vici, Sextus says. They've got volcanic soil there. Makes everything dramatic. You nod solemnly, it's glorious. He chuckles. You laugh, but this one's going to a senator's feast tonight. Roasted whole. Stuffed with goose fat and leeks. They're calling it the centerpiece. Historians still argue whether these kinds of elaborate turnip presentations were common or just isolated cases of culinary hubris. What is known, however, is that the elite often used food as spectacle, especially simple ingredients turned extravagant. You help him lift the crate because how could you not, and you both nearly drop it when a goat tries to snatch the greenery from the top. Chaos ensues. A boy trips over a rope. 2 pigeons dive bomb the cart. Someone curses in Greek. You eventually escape slightly bruised and laughing, and decide to follow one of the distribution carts inland. It's a rickety wooden affair pulled by a donkey who looks like he's seen some things and no longer cares. The cart creaks along the cobbled street past bakeries opening their shutters, past a fountain being scrubbed by a pair of grumbling temple acolytes, and into the edge of the Subura. You're reminded in case you'd forgotten that Rome is loud. Vendors shout. Chickens squawk. A man selling fried chickpea cakes slams a ladle against his skillet with rhythmic fury. A woman yells at a child. The child yells back. Somewhere a musician is playing a flute, slightly out of tune but entirely without shame. The turnip cart stops outside a tiny tavern with a painted sign that reads, Terra et fartum earth and stuffing. Charming. The tavern keeper, a woman with flour on her arms and a knife on her belt, greets the delivery with a grunt. You're late, she says. Early by Subura standards, Sextus mutters. They haggle briefly over price, over the softness of one root, over a crate of greens that may or may not contain caterpillars. You watch fascinated. It's a dance, a ritual. Commerce dressed up as casual insult. Eventually, coins exchange hands. The cart is lighter, and the turnips now belong to the tavern. You step inside with her. The tavern is dim, cool, and smells like yeast and victory. There's a clay oven in the back already glowing. A pot of something steamy sits on a hook above the fire. She catches your look. Stew, she says. Always stew. She picks up a turnip, slices it without looking, and tosses it into the pot. I don't care what the rich say. They can roast and carve and gild theirs with honey. But here, this root feeds people. Day in, day out. You nod. Because, yes, this is what Rome runs on. Not just laws and legions and monuments, but people like her. Stew makers, cart pushers, market criers, and roots like the turnip stubborn, misshapen, overlooked. You thank her, step back into the sun, and realize you're hungry. Which is convenient, because the tavern keeper hands you a hunk of bread and a wooden bowl of stew before you can say a word. It's hot. Salty. Laced with garlic and the bitter tang of crushed leaves. The turnip is soft, but not mushy. Honest, you think? If a vegetable could be honest. You sit on the stoop and eat watching as Rome flows past shouting, clanging, barking, living. And you wonder just for a moment how many stories this city has lost. How many roots have fed lives that never made it into scrolls. How many meals like this one passed without notice. But not today. Today you see it. You taste it. And you remember. You stretch out your legs still holding the empty wooden bowl, now licked so clean it could pass for a piece of polished furniture. The bread crust sits half-finished on your lap, but the stew is gone. Your stomach feels warm, grounded, like you've poured something simple and ancient into the core of your being. Rome hums around you. Dogs trot past with the confidence of citizens. A boy with a basket of eels ducks into a doorway. A very old man is lecturing a statue in the corner square. You can't hear the topic, but you assume it involves politics, dignity, or bad figs. It's time to walk again, because this city, for all its marble and maps, is not understood by sitting still. You head deeper into the Forum. Holatorium, the vegetable market, Rome forgot to romanticize. Unlike the grandeur of the Forum Romanum with its arches and eagles, this is more mud than myth. And that's why it matters. Here you see the city's heartbeat beating between piles of radishes, squashed olives, and yes, the ever-present, utterly unconcerned turnip. You pause at a small stall where a young man is stacking bundles of greens. His hands are quick and practiced, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His tunic dyed the same shade as turnip leaf. Veins deep green touched with dirt. Busy day, you ask? He shrugs. Always is. People get hungry faster than statues do. He gestures toward a crate filled with pale spotted turnips, some fresh, some clearly nearing the end of their shelf life. Want one? This one's got character. You glance at the vegetable in question. It looks like it's frowning at you. Sure, you say. He smiles and wraps it carefully in an old scrap of linen that smells faintly of roasted fennel. First one's free, he says, as if you're entering into some kind of slow, root-based addiction. The next one costs a joke. You nod solemnly. What kind of joke? He winks, one where the senator is the punchline. That's easy. You hand him one involving a senator, a donkey, and a misinterpreted augury. He laughs loudly. A woman at the next stall scowls, which only makes it funnier. You walk on, past the stalls, past the fountains, past a painted wall where someone has scrawled, "More roots, less riots," in wobbly red ink. You wonder if it's political graffiti or just the work of a very passionate gardener. Eventually, you find your way to a small archive tucked behind a collapsed portico. It doesn't look like much from the outside, just another cracked doorway between two crumbling columns. But inside is a different story. Stacks of scrolls, clay tablets, wax slates, bundled lists of market inventories, all sorted by someone with either great devotion or unhealthy levels of free time. A scribe hunched like a question mark and dusted in parchment flakes looks up as you enter. Lost. Looking, you reply. Same thing he mutters and waves you toward a reading alcove. You sit. He returns minutes later with a scroll tied in purple cord. You're here for the root records, I assume. You blink. That's a thing. Oh yes, the ediles were very thorough, especially during shortages. They tracked everything from wheat to lentils to... You guessed it. He taps the scroll. You untie it and begin to read. The text is bureaucratic and dry until it isn't. Fourth day before the calends of December, prices for rapa increased by 2 denarii per crate due to flooding along the Tiber. Seventh day before the nones of March, a riot broke out in the Subura after a shipment of spoiled turnips was sold as blessed by Apollo. Vendor fined. Turnips confiscated. Crowd fed lentils instead. You can't help but chuckle. It's history, yes. But it's also theater and survival. Historians still argue the scribe murmurs beside you unasked whether Rome ever fully embraced the turnip, or if it merely tolerated it. You look up. You have a theory. He considers. I think Rome loved its myths, but it lived on its roots, and the turnips. It was too honest to be a myth, too real to be adored. He nods as if that settles something. Later, you find yourself outside again, sun sliding westward, the air thick with dust and dinner smoke. You follow a narrow street uphill toward the edges of the Aventine district, where the wealthy nap and the philosophers mumble into fig bowls. At a small plaza, you stop. They're surrounded by pigeons, and ivy is a statue. A bust, to be precise, of a man in a senator's cloak with stern brows and a scroll in hand. But what catches your eye is the small rounded pedestal beneath the marble inscription, because etched into the base is something unexpected. A turnip. Not large, not dramatic, just there. Quiet. Etched with care next to the words, "He fed the people." You sit beside it on a stone bench. You wonder who he was. No one around you seems to notice the statue. A woman argues over eggs. A baker shouts something about flour. A child drops a coin and cries like it was his inheritance. But the turnip watches, and so do you. Because the point of all this, these markets, these scrolls, these steaming bowls of stew, isn't just what was built. It's what was eaten, what sustained, what returned season after season when all else failed. The humble turnip carved in stone, not for beauty, but for memory. You rise. Your steps are slower now. Not from fatigue, but from the weight of small things carried long distances. The kind of weight that shaped a civilization and forgot to ask for credit. You walk back toward Gaius's villa. The sky is streaked with gold, and the turnip in your pouch presses gently against your side, like it knows the way home. By the time you return to Gaius's villa, the sun has ducked behind the rooftops, leaving long shadows to pool in the courtyard like lazy cats. The marble glows with that peach-tinted hush only twilight can deliver. Someone somewhere is tuning a lyre. Someone else is cursing a stubbed toe in very theatrical Latin. You slip through the wooden gate and are immediately greeted by the scent of something roasting maybe onions. Definitely olive oil and the barest trace of turnip. Again. Gaius is sprawled across a couch, one sandal dangling off his foot, arms raised behind his head like he's a fresco come to life. When he sees you, he grins. Well, he says, did it try to haggle back? You drop the wrapped turnip into his outstretched palm. It nearly unionized. He snorts and unwraps the cloth, holding the root up to the fading light, like a jeweler assessing a flawed ruby. Ah, a true veteran. I like it. Bruised, slightly bitter, inexplicably smug. Perfect. You take a seat beside him, your own limbs a little heavier than they were this morning. He passes you a cup something warm, spiced, and just a bit too thick to drink elegantly. Barley broth, he says. With turnip shavings, and possibly a piece of last week's philosophy lecture. You sip. It tastes like someone tried to bottle autumn, then added a whisper of moral disappointment. Which you suppose is very Roman. Overhead, the stars begin to poke their tiny heads through the violet sky. One by one, hesitant and blinking. The garden glows from torchlight, now the flames dancing in terracotta sconces, their smoke curling like sleepy thoughts. Gaius sighs. You know, when I was young, really young, I thought senators were like gods. You raise an eyebrow. He laughs. I know, I blame the statuary. All that marble and laurel. Makes you think they're sculpted on the inside, too. Disappointed. Just readjusted. Turns out they eat lie love and argue over vegetable prices like the rest of us. The togas are just window dressing. You both fall into silence. Somewhere nearby, a servant chuckles softly, the sound muffled by ivy. A cicada starts up its night shift melody. A cat strolls by with the calm confidence of an unpaid landlord. You break the quiet. Why turnips, though? Why not apples or beans? Or something less lumpy? Gaius leans back, looking at the sky. Because turnips are stubborn. They grow in bad dirt. They survive frost. They feed the poor and annoy the rich. They're everything Rome wants to be, but in vegetable form. He turns to you, and no one ever goes to war over a turnip. They're too grounded. You think about that. It's true. No battles were ever fought over root vegetables. No treaties signed to secure shipments of rapa. No empires fell because someone overboiled a stew. But in their quiet, unsung way, turnips kept people going. In droughts, in blockades, in seasons when wheat failed and pulses rotted and fruit grew scarce. Historians still argue whether the Roman state ever truly acknowledged the value of its humbler crops, or whether they simply passed turnips off as culinary footnotes. You suspect the truth is somewhere in between. Glorified when convenient, ignored when not. You drain your cup. Did Pliny ever mention this particular turnip, you ask, nodding toward the bruised hero sitting in Gaius's palm? Pliny mentioned everything, he replies. I'm surprised he didn't describe its dreams. You laugh. Maybe he did. Maybe we just haven't found that scroll yet. Gaius sets the root down beside a candle. Its shadow dances against the stone wall around squat noble. You lean back and look up at the stars again. Do you think there's a constellation shaped like a turnip? Gaius considers, not officially, but if you squint hard enough, that one over there looks like it's been boiled. You squint. He's not wrong. Moments later, a servant arrives with a tray of roasted nuts and small wedges of cheese. One of the cheeses is flecked with herbs and something vaguely purple. Turnip rind, she says, seeing your hesitation. You take a piece anyway. It's oddly tangy. Earthy, yes, but also sweet in that unexpected way some vegetables get when they've stopped trying to impress and just focus on being tasty. You ask, do you ever get tired of them? And Gaius shrugs. You don't get tired of bread, or the sun, or your feet. Turnips are like that. They're not exciting, they're just there. And thank the gods for it. He looks at you seriously. Excitement burns hot. But roots hold. The torch nearest you gutters slightly in the breeze. You glance at the turnip again. It hasn't moved, of course, but it feels like it's listening. As if it's waiting for the punchline to a cosmic joke it's been in on for centuries. You reach over and give it a gentle tap. Well done, little one, you murmur. The breeze carries the scent of ash wine and rosemary. Your eyelids are heavy now. Gaius yawns and stretches bones, popping in that satisfying old man way. Tomorrow, he says, we try fermenting it. You groan. Why? Because we can. You nod, already slipping into that soft, internal silence where thoughts become fewer and further between. The stars above blink slowly. A torch crackles, the turnip watches, and Rome, eternal, absurd, glorious Rome, continues to breathe. You wake slowly the way one might emerge from under a thick woolen blanket, half sure it's still night, half hoping it is. Your neck aches in a way that only stone benches and philosophical wine can cause. There's a rooster crowing somewhere far too enthusiastically, probably perched atop a statue of Mars just to be extra smug about it. Stretching your arms, you sit up from the bench in Gaius's garden and rub your eyes. The olive tree above sways gently in the early morning breeze, its leaves whispering secrets that even the poets wouldn't bother to write down. And then you remember today you're supposed to visit a farm. Not a villa. Not a garden, curated by a senator who thinks turnips represent the human condition. No, this is a real working farm. The kind where dirt gets under your fingernails, animals have opinions, and people actually depend on root vegetables to stay alive. So you set off once more, passing through the now familiar mosaic of Rome waking up. Laundry lines flap like sleepy flags, bakeries open their shutters to release clouds of yeasty air, and somewhere nearby a fishmonger is yelling at his own cart. As you pass through the gates leading out of the city, the world shifts. Cobblestones give way to packed earth. Walls thin into fences. The horizon broadens with the golden promise of fields, vineyards, and distant farmhouses slouching under their own centuries. The farm belongs to a woman named Tullia, whose family has tilled the soil since before Julius Caesar was a glimmer in a soothsayer's bad dream. You were told to look for the house with the cypress trees and the faint smell of goat. You find it easily. Tullia greets you with the brisk efficiency of someone who has milked 3 animals and prepared 6 loaves of bread before you even contemplated opening your eyes. Her hands are stained with soil and something vaguely purple. Her hair is tied back with a strip of linen that might once have been a tunic. She looks at you like she's deciding whether you're useful or just another decorative Roman. You here to talk about turnips? She asks flatly. You nod. She sighs, gestures for you to follow, and leads you around the back of the house to a plot of earth that's both humble and heroic. There they are. Dozens upon dozens of turnips, some with fat, confident bellies. others poking shyly from the dirt like stage-frightened actors. Tulia points. That row's early sprout. Those ones over there are for pickling. These here, she kicks at the soil, they're the stubborn ones. Won't grow straight, like senators. You chuckle. She doesn't. Why turnips, you ask? Because you have to. Tulia wipes her hands on her apron and says, because they grow. Rain or not. Good year, bad year. They just grow. And they don't ask questions. She kneels to pull one from the earth, the motion practiced and fluid. The root gives way with a soft pop, flinging a bit of dirt onto her face. She doesn't flinch. Look at this one, she says, holding it out. Ugly, but dense. Stores well. Boils fine. Feed a family or a flock. Hell, I even made turnip cake once. Was it good, you ask? She makes a face. Not important. You follow her to a wooden bench, where she begins to trim the greens from the turnips, sorting them into piles with the speed of someone who's done this thousands of times. Historians still argue whether we ate better back then, she says almost to herself. They write about wheat and wine and figs. But it was this she lifts a bulbous root that kept people upright. There's pride in her voice, but also a kind of fatigue. Not bitterness, just reality. You help her haul a wicker basket of harvested turnips toward the storage shed. The smell of earth and greenery thick in your nose. Inside the shed, it's cool and dim. Root vegetables are stored in rows of straw-lined bins, carefully rotated to prevent rot. A faint whiff of vinegar lingers in the air, evidence of pickling jars somewhere in the back. As you stack your load, you spot something odd. A turnip carved into the shape of a lion. You blink. Tulia follows your gaze and snorts. My nephew. He thinks he's an artist. Carved a Senate scene last week, said it was satire. I said he was wasting good stew meat. You pick it up gently. The detail is surprising. Tiny ridges form a mane, little notches for paws. Its face has the resigned expression of someone who just realized they were sculpted into a vegetable. You place it back and step outside, blinking in the daylight. The sun is higher now, warming the tops of the fields. A group of children runs past, chasing each other with sticks, one of them shouting, I am the Republic of Rapa, before tripping over a chicken. You laugh, you can't help it. Tulia joins you on the porch, passing you a chunk of fresh bread and a slice of something vaguely cheesy. Turnip cheese, she says, answering your raised eyebrow. Don't ask. You bite into it. It's tangy, odd, but not terrible. I once fed nothing but turnips to a whole household, she says. Sick husband, 2 little ones, drought year. No one died. You nod. That's no small thing. And as you sit there chewing on a root you never meant to admire, listening to the sounds of chickens' laughter and the wind threading through olive branches, you realize that Tulia is right. Turnips aren't special, not in the way Roman elites want things to be. But they're enough. Enough to keep going, enough to keep something, someone alive. And maybe in a world that often spins too fast and demands too much, enough is everything. You leave Tulia's farm with dirt on your sandals and the slight aftertaste of turnip cheese lingering like a joke that went a little too far. The road back to Rome winds gently through olive groves and quiet pastures, the kind of landscape that could make even a cynical philosopher pause and write poetry about the dignity of sweat. As you walk, a cart rattles by, pulled by 2 mules, and driven by a man singing a song that includes no kidding a verse about a turnip that broke someone's heart. You raise an eyebrow. The mule snorts. You carry on. By the time you reach the city gates, the sun is high, the marble streets warm underfoot, and Rome is back in full swing. Children dart between columns. Market stalls shout for attention. A street performer juggles figs while reciting bad poetry. In the middle of it all, you find Gaius again reclining in his usual garden spot, like a man who's never stood up in his life. He waves lazily. Did you find your root? You lift the turnip you bought at the Forum, now cradled in a sling of linen like some sacred relic. She has a name, you say. Distinguisha. He grins. Of course she does. You sit and he pours wine into mismatched clay cups. Today's blend tastes like raisins and betrayal. He doesn't notice. Or care. You know, he says between sips, you've done more turnip-related tourism in a week than most Romans do in a lifetime. You nod solemnly. I'm starting to understand things. Dangerous, he replies. Understanding leads to thinking, and thinking leads to being volunteered for public service. You shiver. But truthfully, your thoughts are already spiraling. Not into politics, no, you've had enough of senators and their performative morality, but into something deeper. Into memory, myth. How Rome writes its stories, not just in marble and gold, but also in soup pots and pantry scraps. And that leads you to your next destination, the house of a woman known only as Domina Flava, rumored to possess the largest private collection of Roman agricultural charms in the city. You're not sure what that means either. Her house is tucked into a quiet street just off the Aventine. The door is painted red. A clay statue of a turnip, life-sized and alarmingly detailed, sits beside the threshold like a bouncer with low self-esteem. A servant greets you with a nod, then gestures you inside. The interior is dim, the air thick with incense and herbs. Every wall is covered in shelves, and every shelf covered in charms. Tiny carved roots made of bone wax clay. Painted gourds, dried stalks tied with red thread. Even a miniature plow flanked by pickled beet slices. Flava appears without a sound, a woman in her 60s wearing a robe dyed with onion skins and smelling faintly of mint and vinegar. "You're the one who asked about turnips," she says without introduction. You nod. "Good," she says. "We need more people like you." You're not sure if that's a compliment. She leads you through the room, pointing out her favorite pieces. This one, she says, indicating a bone turnip carved with tiny runes, was worn by a priest during a drought. Said it helped summon rain. Mostly it just confused the goats. She picks up another, an iron amulet in the shape of a root cluster. This one's for fertility. Women would bury it under their beds and hope for twins. Usually they got ants. You chuckle, she doesn't. Historians still argue whether these were true religious tools, she continues, or just folk nonsense that crept into tradition like mold into bread. But here's the thing. Belief makes things real. If enough people say a turnip keeps away evil, then maybe it does. You consider that. Rome is a place of such contradictions. Marble temples filled with superstition. Dirty alleys where philosophy is whispered like gossip. And vegetables with more cultural mileage than some emperors. Flava offers you a small wax charm shaped like a turnip curled around a crescent moon. For protection, she says. Or indigestion. I forget. You tuck it into your satchel. She leads you to a small shrine in the corner. There, surrounded by candles and dried herbs, sits a single, unassuming turnip. Not carved, not painted, just placed. This, she says softly, was the last turnip harvested from my grandfather's field. He died that winter, but this root lasted all season. Never rotted, never wrinkled, just stayed. You stare at it. It's almost unsettling, like a relic. A memory trapped in starch. Some things Flava says we don't explain. We just keep. She leaves you there alone for a moment in the candlelight. The flicker of flame reflects in the turnip's skin, and you swear for one half-sleepy second it winks. You blink. Maybe it's the wine. Maybe it's the week you've had. Maybe it's just Rome where nothing stays dead and everything, absolutely everything, has a story. You thank Flava and step back into the sunlight, blinking against the brightness, your satchel now slightly heavier with belief. Back on the street, a woman is selling roasted chickpeas from a bronze pan. You buy a handful and walk slowly, chewing thoughtfully, watching the city move like a breathing, arguing, occasionally pickling thing. And then from an alley, you hear a boy's voice shouting proudly, "I am Turnipus Maximus." You laugh. You can't help it. Because somewhere along this winding road of recipes and rituals, you've started to understand Rome. Not the one carved on coins or sung by poet, but the quiet one. The hungry one. The one that boils roots at dawn and dreams quietly beneath olive branches. The one that never wastes a story or a turnip. The sun slides lazily across the Roman sky now, throwing long, warm rays over rooftops and porticos, as you make your way back toward the city's core, guided by nothing more than instinct and the rhythmic squish of turnip charm against satchel. You don't have a destination in mind, you just want to walk. To let the smells, sounds, and stray philosophical root vegetables lead the way. You end up in the theater of Marcellus, not for a show, but because someone told you a group of actors is rehearsing a new comedic piece there. And yes, it involves turnips. You slip inside through a side arch, the interior lit golden with afternoon light. A ragtag troupe of performers is mid-rehearsal on the open-air stage, their voices echoing off the old stone. One woman in a teal tunic and sandals too big for her is pacing back and forth with a turnip balanced on her head. You sit down quietly. The scene playing out before you is some absurd mashup of Roman politics, culinary critique, and family drama. A senator returns home after a long campaign only to find his children have replaced the family lares, the household gods, with a shrine to an unusually large turnip. He is understandably upset, but father cries one actor, flinging themselves dramatically across a bench. The turnip listens to us. The audience, two old men, one baker's apprentice, and you chuckle quietly. Another actor dressed as a Vestal virgin delivers a line that is either genius or utter nonsense. He who boils the root stirs the heart. The director claps twice. Too emotional, he says. Try again with more indifference. You sit there for the better part of an hour, letting the performance seep into you like spiced wine. It's silly, yes, but like so many things in Rome, it's doing more than it seems. Underneath the slapstick and root-based metaphors lies something thoughtful, something real. You leave quietly before they finish. Later, you find yourself in the quieter part of the Esquiline Hill, near an old public fountain where retirees gather to talk loudly and throw crumbs at birds that refuse to be grateful. One of the men notices your satchel bulge. Vegetables, he asks. Something like that, you reply. He nods like you've confirmed a long-held suspicion. I once grew a turnip so big it broke the garden wall. Impressive. Named it Agrippa, grew him a little toga, taught him Latin. You're not sure whether to laugh or offer condolences. Historians still argue he continues whether the empire fell because of lead in the pipes, or because we stopped respecting the roots. You nod. Why not? As he settles back onto his bench, still muttering about tuber loyalty, you walk toward a shaded alleyway where you spot a man carving something small and white. It's a sculptor. A real one chiseling what appears to be a bust, except instead of marble, he's working with a dried, oversized turnip. You don't say anything for a moment. Just watch. The shavings fall like old snow. The turnip is slowly taking on the shape of a bearded senator. The detail is almost eerie. He glances up. Practice, he explains. Cheaper than stone, less forgiving. You ask how long it lasts. Not long, he admits, but that's part of the art. Transience, mortality, dinner. You ask if anyone buys them. Occasionally, he says, mostly they rot before anyone decides. He wipes his knife on a cloth and gestures to a shelf nearby. It holds 5 turnip busts each in various stages of decay. One looks downright smug. Another has begun to collapse in on itself, the features melting like candle wax. You stare at them longer than you mean to. You can't preserve Rome, he says, but you can parody it. You thank him and move on the image of those root-faced senators following you like the smell of garlic on a humid day. As the sun begins to lower, you make your way to a small bakery tucked between 2 temples. The air is thick with flour and burnt crust, and the baker, a broad-shouldered woman with a smudge of soot across her cheek, waves you in. Trying something new? She says, pointing to a tray. It's a rustic flatbread studded with turnip slices and drizzled with olive oil and thyme. She shrugs. It's an experiment. You buy one. You eat it hot, standing right there by the oven, and for a moment, everything is quiet. The bread is chewy. The turnip is sweet browned at the edges and soft like roasted memory. You nod. It's good. She nods back. Better than people think. Outside, the bells begin to toll from the Temple of Bologna, signaling evening. The city exhales again. You hear a donkey bray from a distant courtyard. A child screams about something unjust involving grapes. The scent of the day thickens charcoal basil whetstone. You keep walking. Eventually, you find yourself back at Gaius's villa where a low lantern flickers by the door. He's in the garden again, lying on his back this time, staring at the sky like it owes him money. You lie down beside him. The olive tree rustles above you. Crickets begin to sing. You ever wonder, he says, why we give so much meaning to a thing just because it grows in dirt? You think for a while. Because we do too, you say. He nods. The stars begin to come out slow and bashful. One by one. The sky darkens like wine poured into a basin. And somewhere in that quiet, in the space between starlight and soil, you realize you're not just learning about turnips anymore. You're learning about the people who clung to them. The farmers who planted them in doubt. The soldiers who ate them without joy. The poets who dared to write them into metaphors. The bakers who turned them into crust. And the old men who claimed they once debated Caesar with a particularly clever root. It's all ridiculous, and somehow it's all very, very real. The next morning, you wake to the gentle sound of pigeons squabbling over a bread crust just outside the shuttered window. The sun slants in softly, catching on dust motes that drift like lazy thoughts. The turnip sits on the windowsill where you left it, still proud, still unimpressed. You stretch, you yawn, and you realize something strange. You're excited for another day of this. Because today you've decided to follow the money. If turnips have truly embedded themselves into Roman culture, they must have crept into coin purses and price charts too. So you tie your sandals, and head to the most overlooked yet essential organ of the Republic, the tax office. The Tabularium Rome's records hall is carved into the slope of the Capitoline Hill. It's not glamorous. In fact, it smells a little like stale ink and sweat-drenched bureaucracy. But if numbers could talk, this is where they'd gather to gossip. You push open a heavy door and are met with the click of styluses on wax tablets and the shuffling of scrolls. A scribe with a nose that suggests aristocracy and an attitude that screams underpaid raises an eyebrow. Business. Research, you say. Vegetable-based. His sigh is long and practiced. But eventually you're handed a brittle scroll labeled Rationes Frumentariae et Radicum, or more endearingly, Grain and Root Ledgers. It's a collection of annual harvest estimates, ration allowances, and a few highly specific complaints filed by military quartermasters. You find a line that reads turnip requisitions to Legio Nime Hispana. Winter quarter Londinium doubled after oat shipment lost to river rot. You nod. Of course they were. Another entry details an early subsidy for farmers growing root crops in drought-prone districts. They're hardy, it explains, and peasants don't mind the taste once they're hungry enough. One particularly dramatic margin note, clearly added by a scribe having a rough day, reads, "No more turnip surplus. Smells unbearable in the storehouse. Beg senators for barley, not breathless tubers." You chuckle. Even ancient civil servants had their limits. You ask the scribe if he's ever eaten a turnip. Only once he says, "I still have nightmares." Down the corridor, you overhear two clerks arguing. "It's unfair," one says. "He grows olives, I grow turnips, but I pay the same property tax. Then grow olives. I'm allergic." Historians still argue. The second clerk mutters not helpfully whether tax codes ever properly reflected agricultural output, or whether they were just designed to make us all equally miserable. You leave them to it. Outside, you're met with a burst of warm, late-morning air and the buzz of Rome in full commerce mode. The streets are alive. Carts rattle. Vendors shout. Somewhere nearby, a dog is enthusiastically chasing a sandal. You decide to visit a money changer, someone who deals in the physical weight of value, the clink of copper, the glide of silver. You find one near the Basilica Julia, seated behind a stone counter and flanked by two bored-looking guards. You ask him if vegetables ever factored into trade. Not directly, he says, weighing a coin with casual disdain. But everything gets measured eventually. You want to know how much a slave costs during a drought. Look at the price of turnips. He pulls out a cracked wooden abacus. Low yield year. Turnips are scarce, bread goes up, wages drop, tempers flare, slaves cost less. Why? Because everyone's desperate. Even desperation has a market. He pauses. In a good year, you could trade a full sack of turnips for a new cloak. In a bad year, you could barely get a broken sandal. And so it seems even in Rome, a root could anchor an economy quietly, persistently, always undervalued but always there. A kind of edible inflation meter. You thank him and head for the Macellum, Rome's main marketplace for finer goods. It's the domain of imported figs, spiced wines, peacock feathers, and perfumes, with names like Aphrodite's Whisper. And yet, you spot a booth selling preserved turnip essence bottled in tiny clay vials and labeled with florid promises. Enhance digestion, prolong youth, cure ennui. You ask the seller if any of this is true. He smiles. Truth is in the buyer's tongue. You don't buy it. But you do notice a sign beside the stall, as endorsed by Senator Flaccus himself, which, given Flaccus's other ideas, including the ceremonial smashing of substandard radishes, tells you everything you need to know. Moving on, you stumble upon a public auction. A man in saffron robes is selling estate goods left behind by a recently deceased merchant. Among the usual fair dishes, sandals, a mildly haunted-looking bust, you spot a turnip-shaped ink pot. The auctioneer lifts it dramatically. "Behold," he says, "the finest and root-inspired stationery." Someone actually bids. You don't. The winning buyer holds it aloft like a trophy, then whispers to his friend, Before my cousin, he thinks the gods speak through vegetables. You blink. Do they? The man shrugs. At least they don't yell. By now the sun is overhead and the city's pulse has shifted. The streets are slower, heavier. People drift under shaded awnings. Even the pigeons seem to be taking a break. You retreat to a shaded colonnade and pull out the turnip you bought yesterday. It's softened, a little bruised on one side, but still solid. Still humble. Still here. You turn it over in your hand, admiring the layers of dirt, the tiny fracture near its base, the spiral of root like a tail. It's not valuable, it's not glamorous, but it endured the floods. It fed a garrison. It starred in a terrible poem. It became a joke, a tax debate, a metaphor, and somehow a gift. You lean back against the stone pillar, eyes half-lidded, feeling the warmth of the day sink into your bones. Rome might have been built on ambition stone and conquest, but it runs quietly, invisibly on things like this. A stubborn root, a dusty scroll, a whispered joke passed between merchants. History's heartbeat isn't always a drum. Sometimes it's just the soft crunch of a vegetable beneath a soldier's teeth. You leave the colonnade behind as the city stretches toward afternoon, and your next stop is a place where food politics and performance all blur the public baths. Specifically, the baths of Agrippa, Rome's first grand bathing complex. It's not where you'd expect to learn about vegetables, but then again, Rome is rarely what you expect. The entrance is grand, but the interior feels like a warm echo chamber of gossip and steam. Marble pools shimmer under soft torchlight bodies, lounge in various states of contentment, and the air smells of rosemary, sweat, and ambition. You wind your way through the tepidarium past a small cluster of poets debating whether Cicero would have made a good soup ingredient. You spot a trio of men reclining in the frigidarium, cooled down and flushed from earlier heat. One of them is peeling a boiled turnip with the care of someone who takes his snacking rituals extremely seriously. You linger nearby, pretending to examine a mural of Neptune with suspiciously muscular dolphins. I'm telling you, says the turnip peeler Senator Lentulus, only started backing the grain reforms after the turnip banquet. Don't be ridiculous, says another, adjusting his saffron towel. He backed them because of the Sicilian wine tariffs. Historians still argue, a third interjects whether food or bribery sways more votes. But frankly, I'd follow whoever gives me stew. There's laughter. You smile quietly, enjoying the idea of vegetables as currency in high political theater. You imagine senators bribing one another with baskets of root vegetables, no coin exchanged, just a suspiciously plump bag of turnips changing hands in the atrium. Later in the caldarium, where the heat makes your limbs feel liquid and your thoughts blur into fog, you overhear a whisper about the Rapa Pact. Supposedly during one of Rome's more chaotic grain shortages, a group of minor senators formed a quiet alliance, swearing to subsidize root crop farms, promote their consumption, and encourage public turnip festivals as a distraction from wheat price scandals. Turnips never cause riots, someone says, dreamily half asleep on a stone bench. They just sit there and exist. And you think maybe that's the secret. In a city obsessed with performance, the turnip endures by refusing to perform. It doesn't try to impress, it just survives. That makes it threatening in its own unshaven, unwashed way. After drying off and politely refusing an offer of turnip-scented balm from a wandering vendor, it promotes clarity and discourages mosquitoes. You step outside into the slightly cooler light of late afternoon. Your path takes you toward the Circus Maximus, not for a chariot race, but for a different kind of speed culinary theater. You've heard whispers of a Pepina, a fast food stall selling the latest in humble cuisine, the turnip pocket. You find it sandwiched between a gambling tent and a booth selling dubious love amulets. A boy with ink-smudged fingers hands you a warm folded flatbread, filled with mashed turnip minced onion and something tangy you suspect might be pickled fish sauce. You take a bite. It's actually really good. As you chew the cook, a wiry woman with strong arms and stronger opinions tells you, used to be barley porridge and shame. Now they ask for seconds. Who? Senator, she says, grinning. Disguised, of course. One of them dropped a ring last week, had his family crest on it, claimed he was a merchant from Brundisium. Brundisium, my lad. Said it like he didn't just finish shouting in the forum 2 hours earlier. You chuckle. Rome's elite sneaking out for commoner food. It checks out. They might build villas with atriums the size of temples, but something about a greasy flatbread eaten with your hands makes a man feel free. Or at least honest. You finish your snack and wander along the edge of the Aventine Hill. The view here is quietly spectacular, rooftops catching fire in the descending sun. Smoke curling from kitchen vents, birds drifting homeward like lazy punctuation marks. You sit on a low wall and exhale slowly, letting the soundscape of Rome buzz around you. Children run by carrying wooden swords and pretending to be senators. One has tied a turnip to the end of a stick, wielding it like a flail. "Fear the wrath of Rapa Maximus," he shouts. You're beginning to wonder if Rome is just one big vegetable-themed fever dream. Eventually, the city lights begin to flicker to life. Torches lit braziers, stoked shadows, lengthening like stretched parchment. You head toward a quiet square tucked behind a row of tenements where an old man sits beside a low brazier, roasting something in a pan. He nods as you approach. "Care for some?" he asked, gesturing to the charred wedges sizzling over the coals. "What is it?" "Turnip, of course." You smile and accept a piece. It's crisp on the edges, soft in the middle, smoky, and a little bitter. You nod your thanks, and the man speaks again without prompting. "My wife hated them," he says. "Said they tasted like wet dirt and stubbornness. But when things got tight, she knew what to cook. Always came back to them." He stares into the fire for a long moment. "Funny thing, now I eat them to remember her." You don't speak. You just sit beside him, sharing the warmth of the fire and the quiet between bites. That's the thing about turnips. They're everywhere and nowhere. They slip between pages, between empires, between memories. They aren't immortalized in marble, but they sit in pots and scrolls and conversations in the small places history doesn't always look. And somehow in their bitterness, they carry sweetness. As you rise to leave, the old man gives you a final nod. "Take care of that root," he says. "It knows more than it lets on." You nod, because honestly, you're starting to believe him. You walk back through the winding streets of Rome with your thoughts still steeped in steamed turnip oil and half-whispered bathhouse conspiracy. The sun has finally given into dusk, and a blue-gray hush has settled over the rooftops, broken only by the occasional bark of a dog or the clatter of amphorae behind a tavern. It's the kind of evening where the city exhales, and so do you. But the night isn't over, because tonight you've been invited to witness something rarely spoken of, even more rarely documented: a midnight harvest. No, not in some sweeping countryside with a pastoral flute in the background. In the city. You've heard rumors of it before, how some families, especially those descended from old farming stock, maintain tiny rooftop gardens. Not for show, not for profit, but out of habit, or memory, or reverence. And once a year at the turning of the season, they go up quietly under the cover of night and pull from the dirt what they've grown. It's not exactly legal. Rome's tenement rooftops aren't meant to support agricultural life, especially not ones involving livestock or soil, heavy enough to dent the brickwork. But what is law really in a city that believes everything can be poetic if you use the right metaphor? You arrive at the designated insula near the Subura, a cluster of narrow buildings leaning on each other like old friends too tired to stand alone. A woman named Flavia meets you at the door. She's wiry, sharp-eyed, and smells faintly of vinegar and mint. "This way," she says, and you follow her up rickety stairs that creak like a warning with every step. At the top is a trapdoor. She opens it. You emerge onto the rooftop under a soft canopy of stars. The city spreads out below like a patchwork quilt, stitched with torchlight and late-night arguing. And here in the moon's quiet grin is a garden. A real one. Boxed plots of earth, clay pots, reused amphorae split open to hold soil. And in the center, under a sheet of canvas tied with fraying rope, the unmistakable stalks of turnips, fat and leafy and glowing silver in the night. This one, Flavia says, crouching and brushing back a handful of leaves, came from my great-grandmother's seeds. She smuggled them in her shoe when they were fleeing the floods. Said they tasted like survival. You nod, unsure if speaking would be too loud for the moment. She pulls one gently. It resists, then gives way with a wet sigh. Pale and round, speckled with dark flecks of soil, it's not much to look at. But somehow it feels sacred. "We don't sell these," she says. "We eat them. Or we give them to the temple. Or we pickle them and open the jars when someone's sick or sad or remembering." You ask if she believes in their power. She shrugs. "I believe in keeping promises, and we promise to never stop growing." You can't argue with that. Below, a man whistles, a simple rhythmic tune. It drifts up to the rooftop like incense, a signal, a song, maybe both. Others arrive, neighbors, cousins, the quiet boy from the stairwell who always reads by the window. They come carrying baskets, jars, and knives wrapped in cloth. No one speaks loudly. The work begins like a dance that's been done 100 times. Cut, lift, brush, place, turnip after turnip, gentle as a prayer. You watch feeling like an outsider and a witness and a little bit of both. This isn't a reenactment or a historical curiosity. This is living Rome. The city underneath the city. The heartbeat under the marble. The part that refuses to die even when history forgets its name. And there's something magical about seeing vegetables passed hand to hand under the stars. No coins, no records. Just trust and ritual and the warmth of being known. After a while, someone hands you a piece of flatbread. It's warm, folded. Inside shaved turnip olive oil, a smear of fig paste. You bite, you sigh. Because sometimes the best food isn't cooked. It's just remembered. Flavia sits beside you watching the others work. You know she says they used to say the gods made turnips before they made people. Put them underground so the humans would have to dig. Prove they were worth eating. Did they pass? She grins. We're still here, aren't we? Later, when the baskets are full and the soil smooth and the night starting to hum with early morning's breath, the group gathers in a loose circle. One of the elders, a man with hands like bark and a voice like gravel, recites something soft and slow. It's not Latin, or maybe it is, but older, less formal. A nursery rhyme, maybe, or a hymn, or a spell. He ends by placing one especially large turnip in the center of the group. For the city, he says. And the others echo for the city. No one explains. You don't ask. Some things you feel rather than define. By the time you return to your lodging, the sky's beginning to pankin, and the birds are daring the silence to break. You place your own small turnip on the table by the window, still smelling faintly of mint and earth and night air. And as you crawl into bed, feet, dusty, brain-fogged heart oddly full, you think of rooftops and rituals and the weird, quiet love people can have for a root vegetable. Rome, after all, isn't made of stone. It's made of people. And tonight it smelled like turnips. You wake late, the sun already halfway up the wall, slanting through your shutters in slow golden beams. There's still dirt under your fingernails, a bit of time stuck in your tunic. And beside you on the table, your turnip glows in the morning light like a relic in a shrine. You didn't dream last night, not that you remember. But your first waking thought is about trade routes. Because today you're chasing turnips beyond Rome's gates. It's easy to forget, surrounded by temples and gossip and poetry about legumes, that Rome is more than just the city. It's a web. A hungry, sprawling system of roads and ships and oaths that stretch from the Alps to Africa. And somehow turnips hitched a ride on all of it. You make your way to the Porta Capena, where carts groan and creak under grain sacks and olive oil amphorae. Beyond this gate lie the great roads of Rome. The Appian Way begins here, stretching its dusty fingers out toward Capua and beyond. Soldiers march this road, pilgrims, merchants, fugitives, and yes, vegetables too. Historians still argue whether root vegetables were part of regular military supply trains, or if they were more of a local supplement. But archaeological evidence shows turnips showing up in the oddest places, buried in the ashes of outposts preserved in clay jars found in Gallic ruins, even mashed and dried in the remains of a shipwreck off the coast of Sicily. You hitch a ride with a cart driver named Spurius. His cart smells of straw and stubbornness, and his mule has the disposition of a disgruntled philosopher. What are you hauling, you ask, after a long silence. He gestures at the bundles wrapped in burlap. Turnip biscuits, for the fort out in the hills. They last. They fill. And the soldiers complain less when their mouths are busy. You raise an eyebrow? He shrugs. Also, they soak up wine like a sponge. Handy during long marches. It's not glamorous. But as you bump along the road passing fig trees and fields thick with summer haze, you begin to understand the turnip's role as a quiet enabler. It didn't win battles, but it fed the people who did. The landscape unfolds gentle hills, stone markers, the occasional sheep who seems deeply suspicious of your presence. Rome's countryside is not the rolling gold of imagination, but it's stubbornly fertile. It gives when treated right. Like a turnip, you suppose. At the next stop, you meet a farm girl named Levia, who's loading baskets into a wagon. She squints at your sandals and your city-soft hands. You don't work the fields, she says. Not today, you reply. She grins, lucky. She's sending her produce to a trader in Ostia, Rome's bustling port. There, it will be packed into crates sealed with wax and sent to wherever the contracts say. across the sea to Numidia, or north to Gaul. Maybe even east where the empire stretches toward dust and strange spices. And in those crates turnips, you ask if it's worth it. Shipping a route so humble across half a continent. She wipes her hands on her skirt. Not for me. But city folk pay more if you say it came from far away. Same route, different dirt. Fancy language makes a better stew. She's not wrong. Roman menus from the wealthier domus often listed origin points alongside dishes the way we might tout grass-fed or farm-to-table. A turnip from Etruria was more desirable than one grown behind the bakery, even if they tasted the same. This is where the root becomes currency. In the great machine of Roman logistics, even the lowliest vegetable became a player. Traded, taxed, tallied, counted in census records, mentioned in ship manifests, passed hand to hand in a network so vast, so intricate that few citizens ever realized the scale. You reach a roadside tavern by midday. It's nothing special, just a shaded courtyard with a few wooden benches and a menu scratched onto plaster. Today's special, turnip porridge with fennel seed. You don't even flinch anymore. The porridge is hot, bland, comforting. You eat while watching the traders pass, some on foot, some on mules, one riding a donkey that seems personally offended by the heat. One man pauses by your table. Mind if I sit? You nod. He's older, tanned, with a scroll case slung over one shoulder and a coin pouch that jingles slightly when he moves. A tax collector, maybe, or a grain clerk. Either way, he has the look of someone who's seen the inside of more warehouses than temples. He nods at your bowl. You know he says the price of those went up after the Parthian raid last year. Not because of the raid itself, because the road collapsed near Antioch and slowed the grain caravans. People panic when they can't get wheat, so they eat roots. You spoon another mouthful thinking, this, he adds, tapping the edge of your bowl, is a symptom of imperial anxiety. You smile. It tastes like anxiety. He chuckles. Everything does if you're honest. After he leaves you, sit a while longer, letting the breeze cool your face. Trade routes are funny things. They bring silk and pepper and philosophy, but they also bring stories. A crate of turnips from Gaul doesn't just carry food. It carries memory, soil, labor, 100 hands you'll never meet, 1,000 meals you'll never taste. And that's the other magic. Because Rome wasn't built in a day, but it was fed every single one. And under all the grandeur, under the frescoes and forums and fiery speeches, there were wheels turning, carts moving, biscuits baking, turnips growing, quiet invisible work that made the noise possible. You stand, brush off your tunic, and begin the walk back. Tomorrow, maybe you'll visit the docks, or the archives, or the place where someone once carved a thank you note to a vegetable in stone. But today you walk the road, and the road told you this. Even humble things travel far. You return to the city with dust on your sandals and turnip in your thoughts. It's late afternoon now, and the Roman sky wears its pale lavender shawl, casting the streets in that hazy, honeyed glow that makes even the laundry look poetic. And what better way to follow the winding logic of Roman trade routes than by going straight to the brain of the empire, the archives? Yes, today you're going to the tabularium. It sits hulking and angular beneath the Capitoline Hill like an ancient memory box. Gray stone, endless steps, and enough echoing hallways to lose a historian in. The tabularium houses the official records of the Roman Republic and later the Empire. Decrees, census rolls, tax assessments, and yes, agricultural inventories. Because as much as Rome loved war and gods and flashy rhetoric, it ran on numbers. And food. And especially on counting the food. You step inside the cool stone halls, the air dense with ink and history. Scribes scurry past with tablets balanced like serving trays. The place smells like beeswax, old leather, and a faint hint of desperation. You approach the clerk's desk, manned by a man who looks like he's been copy editing since the reign of Numa Pompilius. I'm looking for root crop records, you say. He doesn't blink, just slides a wax-covered finger along a scroll rack and pulls one out. Ration lists or market quotas? You blink back. Both. He nods as if that's normal, because in Rome it probably is. You're led down a narrow hallway into a chamber lined with cubbyholes, each stuffed with scrolls and tablets. And here, dear listener, is where the turnip becomes immortal. The first scroll lists market counts average monthly quantities of turnips, entering the Forum Holatorium separated by season and region. Apparently, Etrurian turnips peaked in early winter. The Sabine ones were more popular in spring. And Gaulish imports, yes, they really were imported saw spikes during bad harvest years. Historians still argue whether some of these records were exaggerated to mask losses or promote imperial stability. You wouldn't put it past Roman bureaucracy to inflate a root or two. The next tablet is more curious. It's a conscription supply sheet from a provincial outpost detailing what rations were issued to recruits. Bread, salted pork, dried olives, and there it is, turnip biscuits. 5 per soldier per fortnight, it says. The note continues for chewing, for boiling, for trade with locals. Chewing, boiling, trading. The whole Roman economy in 3 culinary verbs. You read on. Another scroll outlines surplus transfers during a grain shortage. Turnips were stored in amphorae packed in ash or sand to preserve them. Some were pickled with mustard seed and vinegar. Some were sent dried pre-sliced. And in one case, your favorite, they were mashed, salted, and pressed into bricks. Useful for field rations or wall repairs, the clerk mutters. You're not sure if he's joking. And then you find it. A marginal note barely legible scribbled in the side of a tax record. Peasant refused coin. Demanded 3 turnips instead. Said he trusted roots more than Rome. You smile. Because even buried in bureaucracy, the personality of the people peeks through. You spend hours there tracing the path of a vegetable from seed to empire. Reading notes on harvest yields. Reports of famine. Adjustments to the annona, the state grain dole, which sometimes substituted roots when wheat ran low. Turnips as policy. Turnips as solution. And yet no poetry. No scroll of love verses dedicated to a particularly rotund rapa. No statue to the god of root vegetables. Just line after line of units issued price fluctuations and spoilage rates. The quiet, unsentimental scaffolding that holds an empire upright. Eventually your eyes blur and your stomach growls. The clerk, sensing your limits, returns. Found what you needed. You stretch. I think I found more than I expected. He chuckles. That's how Rome works. You go looking for grain, you find roots. You step back into the city as the light begins to fade. Torches flare to life. Somewhere nearby a flute trills in celebration or possibly defiance. The scent of roasting meat drifts on the air, but beneath it always is that familiar earthy tang. That humble breath of root. You think about the scrolls, the numbers, the ink-stained math of survival, and you realize something. Rome didn't build monuments to turnips, but it counted them. It stored them, shipped them, tracked them, traded them. And that in its own way is reverence, because not everything sacred wears marble. You make your way to a nearby tavern. It's noisy, warm, smells like pepper and ambition. You order whatever the cook recommends. He brings you a plate of pork and lentils. And next to it, a single roasted turnip. Blackened edges, steam curling up in a lazy spiral. You eat it slowly, and it tastes important. Not fancy, not memorable, but like something Rome would keep just in case. Like something that matters when the lights go out and the roads are quiet and the scribes have stopped writing. Like something you trust. And as you finish your meal, you realize that might be the highest praise of all. You leave the tavern with a warm belly and a mind spinning quietly with inventory figures and roasted root epiphanies. The streets are darker now, lit by flickering torches and oil lamps swinging from doorposts. A mist drifts in from the Tiber, softening the edges of columns and casting the city in a dreamier hue. Rome turned watercolor. You wander without a destination, your feet carrying you past shuttered stalls and the sleeping bulk of old temples. One archway leads to another until you find yourself in an odd little square, half forgotten, half under construction. It's silent, except for the drip-drip of a leaky fountain and the low murmurs of a couple arguing over a dog. Somewhere above you, a cat knocks over a terracotta bowl and sends it clattering into history. And there just ahead is a plaque. Stone, faded, cracked at one corner, but still legible. It's a dedication from a guild. The Collegium Radicarius. Yes, the Brotherhood of Root Merchants. You rub your eyes, but it's real. Apparently, even tuber traders had their own guild complete with bylaws, banquet days, and a patron deity, Demeter, of course. The plaque mentions a certain Lucius Apronius, known for honest weights and once gifted the entire Subura with winter turnips during the famine of the 138th year. Historians still argue whether such guilds were influential or merely ceremonial, existing more for wine and bragging rights than actual economic sway. But clearly someone cared enough to carve it in stone. You wonder what Lucius would think, knowing that centuries later a stranger would stand in the mist, reading his vegetable resume. Probably you're welcome. You linger there a while, leaning on the wall, eyes tracing the grooves in the stone. It's a humble monument. No statues, no gods, no gold leaf, just facts. A life measured in fairness and tubers. And somehow that feels weightier than all the marble around you. Eventually the air grows cooler and your feet lead you onward again. This time toward one of Rome's oldest traditions, the street feast. You arrive just as the fires are being stoked. It's informal, a kind of neighborhood potluck with fewer rules and more singing. Someone's roasted a whole fish. Someone else has brought amphorae of cheap red wine that tastes faintly of smoke and courage. You're handed a plate with something brown and steaming, and yes, again, turnip infused. Sweetened turnip cakes, the server says, clearly proud. With dates, from an old family recipe. Goes back to the first Claudians, or so my aunt swears. You take a bite. It's sweet, earthy, just a little gritty. Historians still argue whether this counts as dessert. Someone behind you says, laughing. You look around the circle, traders' washerwomen, off-duty guards. 2 very drunk philosophers and a teenager trying to impress a girl by juggling bread. The girl is unimpressed. The bread is stale. You sit beside an old man with a toothless grin and a tunic that may have once been white. He's eating turnip soup with the calm patience of someone who's done this 1,000 times before. Best root in the world, he says, unprompted. You nod. Reliable, he adds. Not like figs or people. You ask if he's always liked turnips. He shrugs. Doesn't matter, they were there. When the harvest failed. When the army took the grain. When my wife left, well, they didn't help. But they didn't leave either. You laugh. He doesn't. But seriously, he says, setting down his bowl, there's something noble about surviving. About feeding people. Even when it's ugly. Even when no one thanks you. He pauses, then adds, Rome was built by things like that. Not just swords and emperors, but pots of soup that didn't run out. And there it is again. That creeping, comforting truth. That in all the pageantry and pomp of the empire, it was still the quiet, humble things, roots, and routine that held everything together. You offer him a swig from your wine cup. He nods and thanks drinks, then immediately sneezes and blames the pepper. Around the fire, someone starts a story about a senator who once tried to pass off a dyed melon as a giant turnip to win a harvest competition. He was caught, publicly shamed, forced to eat the entire melon while villagers threw actual turnips at him. Serves him right, says a woman chewing on a rib bone. They say he still can't stand the color purple, adds another. More laughter. The fire crackles. Someone starts playing a pipe. You sit there slowly sipping wine, the scent of ash and fennel and river air, swirling together like a lullaby. The stars come out tentative and blink soft. And as the night grows deeper, you realize something. Turnips may not be glamorous, or sweet, or celebrated in song, but they are remembered. In plaques, in soup, in old jokes and older bellies. They've fed cities, marched with legions, waited in root cellars while the world fell apart and stitched itself back together again. They've lasted, and as you stretch out beside the fire full and just tipsy enough to feel poetic, you whisper quietly into the night. Here's to you, you lumpy, noble root. And somewhere in the soil under Rome, 100 seeds nod back. The next morning, you wake up with a vague ache behind your eyes and the unmistakable scent of wood smoke lingering in your clothes. There's still a smear of turnip syrup residue on your sleeve from last night's sweet cakes, and as you sit up stretching under the half-collapsed canvas of your temporary shelter, you hear the soft rhythm of early Roman life humming around you. Vendors shouting over bread, hooves clacking on stone. Somewhere a flute plays a tune that might be older than the city itself. You wander through narrow alleys still wet from the previous night's dew, dodging sluggish carts and sleepy cats. Today's plan. You're visiting a scholarly archive, one that claims to house the largest surviving collection of Roman culinary records west of the Palatine. You're skeptical, but curious, and maybe just looking for a place with a bench. The building is unimpressive. Crumbling stucco cracked mosaic floor and a door that groans like it's tired of holding secrets. Inside, however, is a treasure trove. Shelves stacked with wax tablets, papyrus scrolls, clay labels, and the unmistakable scent of old ink and mildew. It smells like history, dense and slightly damp. You're met by an elderly man named Pollux, whose eyebrows could pass for dust bunnies and whose tunic is more patch than fabric. He doesn't greet you so much as squint at you like a suspicious librarian. But when you say the word turnip, something shifts. He brightens. They never ask about the roots, he mutters. Always the spice trade, the wine laws, the sauces, but not the roots. He shuffles off muttering in Greek and returns with a stack of worn tablets and a scroll so brittle it could crumble if you sneeze too close. This, he says, is a recipe for boiled turnip with coriander vinegar and fish sauce dated to the late Republic. Found near Capua, etched on the back of a debt record. You blink. Dual-use parchment, he shrugs. Very Roman. Historians still argue whether Roman recipes written in margins were signs of scarcity or just household improvisation. Either way, this one proves something important. Turnips didn't just exist in the background. They were etched into memory, literally. Another scroll reveals a list of preserved rations for a garrison in the northern provinces. Barley, lentils, salted pork, and dried turnip mash, noted with a warning, only to be eaten thrice in a week, else cause wind. You chuckle. Pollux doesn't. It's physiological, he says gravely. I've studied it. You believe him. Another document catches your eye, a poem scrawled in the margins of a tax form, possibly by a very bored bureaucrat. It reads, "Turnip for king's root for the bold, hot in the cauldron, stubborn and cold." You ask if it's famous. Pollux frowns. It is now. You spend hours poring over forgotten notes and half-formed culinary philosophies. There's an entire scroll dedicated to roots and the moods they invoke, arguing that turnips produce calmness, whereas onions spark mischief. One segment outlines different ways to carve roots into figurines for temple offerings. Early root art, Pollux explains, lost to time and mold. Eventually your stomach grumbles and you thank your host for his time and his obsession. He nods, hands you a wax imprint of the turnip poem and whispers, "Guard it well." Someone once tried to trade it for 2 jars of peppercorn. You nod solemnly and leave, holding the little slab like a relic. Outside, the sun has risen fully. The city is loud again, joyfully, unapologetically alive. You make your way toward the river, following the sound of clattering pots and shouting cooks. You've been told there's a popina down by the docks that makes the best turnip stew in the city. When you arrive, it's chaos. Cooks yelling, bread flying, a rooster tied to a barrel trying to peck a wine jug into submission. You find a stool and order the stew. Regular or philosophers, the cook asks. You raise an eyebrow. Regulars meet. Philosophers got more herbs and more regrets. You go with philosophers. When it arrives, it's piping hot, swirling with parsley and rosemary and something sharp enough to wake your gums. You take a sip. It's deep, earthy, like someone boiled down a field and stirred an ambition. You chew slowly. Somewhere behind you, a sailor is singing a bawdy song about Neptune's lost sandals. Children are laughing over a dropped pomegranate. The city pulses with its usual rhythm, heat, heart, hunger. And the stew, it holds its own. You pause between bites and think about everything you've seen, turnips offered at temples carved into charms, used in metaphors, meals, metaphysical lectures, and somehow always there. Not demanding, not glamorous, just present, enduring. At another table, an old woman tells her granddaughter, "During the plague, we ate nothing but turnip paste for 6 weeks. The girl grimaces. The woman laughs. But we lived. That's what counts." You finish the bowl and step back out into the sun. Rome smells like it always does sweat spice soap ambition, but there's something comforting about it now. You carry the wax poem with you, tucked into your belt like a lucky coin. As you head up toward the Aventine, your eyes scan the corners of the street. Not for statues or triumphs, but for roots. They're everywhere if you know where to look. Later that afternoon, you find yourself standing beneath the shade of an old olive tree, its crooked branches creaking gently in the breeze like the sighs of a sleepy god. You've made your way to one of Rome's lesser-known public gardens, a place half forgotten by time and fashion where elders gather to trade weather predictions, olives and stories no one asked for. It's quiet here, peaceful, which makes it the perfect place to meet a man named Lucan, a retired census clerk who now dedicates his days to the civic legacy of Roman produce. In short, Lucan is writing a history of vegetables. He greets you with a nod and a bundle of scrolls tied together with what appears to be a shoelace. His toga is rumpled, his sandals mismatched, and he's clutching a turnip like it's both weapon and muse. You're here for the truth, he says. You weren't exactly, but now you are. Lucan guides you to a weathered bench beneath a trellis of grapevines and immediately launches into his thesis. that the Roman census wasn't just a tool for taxation or military draft. It also revealed the economic role of plants, especially humble ones like the turnip. You raise an eyebrow, he continues. The early censuses, he says, unrolling a cracked scroll, included records of what households grew in their gardens. Not just for food, but as a measure of virtue. You see, the state believed agricultural diligence was moral diligence. He points to a faded table of figures with columns labeled wheat, olive, grape, turnip. Notice the frequency. More turnip plots than vineyards in poorer districts. And they tried to tax that too. You blink. Historians still argue, he adds with a flourish, whether these vegetable-based virtues were real beliefs or just a clever way to shame the elite into planting things. You sip from the water skin he offers. It tastes faintly of mint and beeswax and not along. He flips to another scroll. This one, he whispers reverently, was copied from a senatorial debate. They're arguing about whether a surplus of turnips is a sign of civil stability or agricultural laziness. One senator apparently declared the man who grows a turnip does not dream of conquest. Another replied, nor does he revolt if fed. Lucan sighs dreamily. I think that's beautiful. You're not sure if you agree, but it's oddly poetic in that Roman way, practical, dramatic, and slightly passive-aggressive. He shares more tidbits. Apparently, census officials used to joke about the turnip census, bump a spike in root production just before tax season, as people tried to appear more virtuous by pretending their backyards were full of produce rather than gambling dens and old laundry. There's even a marginal note in one record. This man showed us 5 turnips in a smug expression. One was a rock. You try not to laugh, Lucan does, loudly. You ask him if he thinks turnips actually shaped policy. He pauses. Maybe not policy, he says, scratching his chin, but perception. Oh yes, absolutely. When a senator wanted to sound humble, he'd say he grew turnips. When a poet wanted to insult luxury, he'd write about spoiled truffles and contrast them with good, honest roots. He shows you a final scroll, a chart of grain prices versus root prices with turnips holding steady through droughts wars and even the Great Flood of 121. See, he grins. Consistency, the true Roman value. You thank him and make to leave, but he presses a turnip into your hands, dried, shriveled, and wrapped in a strip of linen. For memory, he says. You tuck it into your bag like a relic, unsure whether to laugh or bow. Back in the city proper, the afternoon sun has begun to melt the shadows. You pass a wall where children have drawn vegetables with chalk. A giant orange blob is labeled the King of Roots. You can't help but smile. As you turn down a side alley near the Theater of Marcellus, you hear music pipes and soft drumming, followed by the laughter of a small crowd. Curious, you follow the sound and discover a makeshift puppet show in full swing. The puppets, turnips, turnips with eyes and bits of wool for hair. The lead puppet, a large dignified specimen with a toga made from napkin scraps, announces, I am Senator Tiberius Maximus, defender of the kitchen and speaker of the stew. Children laugh. One puppet falls over dramatically and declares, I was overboiled in gall. Even the parents are giggling now. The puppeteer, a gangly man with ink-stained hands, nods to you as you linger at the edge. We perform every Saturn's Day, he says. The history of Rome, as told by vegetables. You ask why? He shrugs. Because they're honest and because it's cheap. The show continues. In this episode, a truffle attempts to seduce the turnip senate with promises of decadence. The turnips vote to remain humble and boil themselves for the common good. It's ridiculous. It's oddly moving. You leave a coin in the hat and walk on the image of a felted turnip in a miniature laurel wreath burned into your memory. The sun begins to sink and the light turns golden, catching in the dust that hangs like incense in the air. Rome exhales again. Tired but never still. And you're holding a dried root of poem in wax and more turnip lore than anyone reasonably needs. And somehow it feels just right. Evening settles over Rome like a warm woolen cloak, heavy with history woven with firelight, and always slightly itchy. You're wandering now, full of dinner and strange root-related reflections, your sandals, scuffing against cobbles worn smooth by centuries of arguments, processions, and very determined goats. You have no destination. Not really, just curiosity guiding your feet. Eventually you end up near the Palatine Hill, where the silhouettes of ruined imperial palaces stretch like broken teeth against the indigo sky. There's a hush here, even in a city that never truly sleeps. A kind of reverence. You pause near an old column stump and sit, watching moths circle a nearby torch. Then you hear a low chant, almost like a hum. A procession slow and silent emerges from the shadows, 5 figures in dark saffron robes, each holding, yes, a turnip. You're too tired to be surprised anymore. They move in unison steps measured, faces serene. One of them pauses near a small altar, more of a stacked rock pile really, and places his root gently on the top. Another pours a bit of wine beside it. They all bow, then vanish down a side path, leaving behind only the scent of crushed rosemary and a lingering, eerie calm. You glance at the turnip still glistening with wine. What just happened? You whisper aloud. Historians still argue whether these nighttime rituals were part of an official cult or simply local tradition. There are scattered records of nocturnal offerings to Saturn, mostly minor rural events tied to agriculture, but nothing definitive about turnips under moonlight. Of course that makes it more magical. You don't touch the offering, it feels too personal. But as you walk away, you keep glancing over your shoulder, half expecting it to glow. Rome does this to you. You wind down toward the Tiber, the river gleaming like a knife's edge under the moon. The bridges are quiet now, just the occasional merchant cart rumbling across. You find a low wall and sit again, feet dangling, gaze drifting. Across the water, a tavern window spills yellow light and laughter. Someone inside sings a sloppy ballad about Neptune's wife and a barrel of wine. It's off-key, but oddly comforting. You exhale, and then you remember you still have one more place to visit. It's small, modest, hidden behind a butcher's stall that smells aggressively of fennel and regret. You've heard whispers about this place, a one-room museum of sorts curated by an eccentric called Cassia, who collects culinary relics. You duck behind the stall tap on the wooden panel and wait. It creaks open. Cassia greets you with a candle and a suspicious squint. She's tall, draped in layers of teal linen, and wears a necklace of tiny ceramic amphorae. You're here for the root room, she says. Not a question. You nod, she grins. The space is cramped and candlelit. Shelves line every wall filled with dried herbs, strange jars, and faded scrolls. In the center under glass sits a small collection of perfectly preserved turnips. Some pickled, some carved, one painted with the face of Emperor Claudius. This, Cassia whispers, gesturing dramatically, is the true root of Rome. She shows you her treasures. A coin minted during a famine stamped with a turnip on one side and a sheaf of barley on the other. Symbol of resilience, she says. Or a bad joke by the mint. Historians still argue. A child's wax tablet with a crude drawing stick figures harvesting roots. Found in a villa kitchen near Pompeii. Proof that even the young knew their tubers. And the prize, a scroll fragment attributed maybe dubiously to Seneca. A line circled in red ink reads, "What use is empire if we do not honor the ground?" She leans close, that they don't teach that in rhetoric school. You ask why she collects these things. She shrugs. Because someone has to. Rome forgets, you know. It gilds, it dramatizes. It throws up marble statues to men who never touched dirt. But the roots they remember. You thank her, genuinely. She presses a tiny wooden token into your palm, shaped like a turnip, of course. For the road. You step back into the night token, warm from her hand. You don't quite know where to go now, but that's okay. Rome rewards wanderers. You stroll past a baker's window where dough rises under cloth, a cat curled up nearby like a guardian spirit. Past graffiti that reads, "Sleep is for the weak eat turnips," in enthusiastic red ink. Past 2 drunk students arguing about whether Cicero ever endorsed legumes. You end up on a quiet rooftop, the perfect Roman ending, high above the noise, close to the stars. You lie back token in hand, full of history stories and more root knowledge than you ever expected. The sky overhead is streaked with clouds, soft and slow. And you think if the gods are watching, they must be laughing. Or maybe they're munching on something earthy and honest. Something like a turnip. You sleep longer than expected. When you finally stir, the sun is already halfway up the sky. And Rome hums at full volume. Merchants shouting prices with operatic flare roosters performing an encore nobody asked for. And the sharp clang of a pot dropped somewhere in the distance. The turnip-shaped token still rests on the stone windowsill where you left it, catching a glint of light like it's trying to be noble. You stretch, you yawn, and you wonder what's left to learn about turnips. Apparently, a lot. Because today you're headed to the Library of Agrippa. You've heard about it from everyone with even a passing interest in scrolls. Built during the reign of Augustus, the library once held military treatises, legal records, poetry, and a according to rumor, an entire section on useful plants. Most of that part was likely moved or destroyed when a senator accidentally set fire to his toga during a dramatic reading of Virgil, but you've been promised that a few root-related texts still survive. So off you go. You wind through sun-drenched alleys, your path taking you past taverns offering boiled lentils for breakfast, and barber shops where customers recline like fallen gladiators. A temple bell rings overhead. 2 cats wrestle in the shade. Rome, as usual, does not care that you're on a scholarly quest. It lives in its own rhythms. The library stands near the Pantheon squat, and unimpressed with itself, no towering columns or grand inscriptions. Just thick walls, an arched door, and a bored-looking scribe outside who waves you in with barely a glance. Inside, it's cool and dim, the scent of ink and dry parchment soothing your sun-drowsed nerves. You follow the curved shelves until you find the section marked Agriculturae and Domestica. It's small, dusty, tucked between aqueduct repair records and birdsong poetry vol. 2. Perfect. You run your fingers across the scroll labels, some barely legible, others clearly rewritten by hands, far less elegant than the originals. Then you find one. Thin reed parchment rolled tight, bound in twine stained with age. The tag reads De Rapa et Redixibus, on turnips and roots. You sit carefully unrolling it on a low cedar desk. The scribe glances over but says nothing. He's too busy illustrating a diagram of a leak. The scroll is a mix of practical advice and unhinged superstition. There are planting recommendations so after the first thunder if you wish to avoid worms, and preservation techniques involving vinegar honey and the laughter of a midwife. You're not sure about that last one. One passage catches your eye. The rapa, when buried beside a soldier's grave, may absorb his strength. Thus do the farmers of Vai call it the warrior's root. Historians still argue whether this is poetic metaphor or early folklore with ritualistic intent. But it gives you chills. Further down the scroll, a more philosophical voice emerges. Consider the root humble and unseen. It nourishes with no demand. It grows in silence. It endures beneath storms, war, and forgetfulness. Would that our laws did the same? You pause there, letting that one settle. Because really, that's been the theme all along, hasn't it? The turnip is more than food, as metaphor as mirror. The scroll ends with a recipe boiled turnip slices served over lentil mash, garnished with leaves of virtue, probably bay or parsley. And underneath, scrawled in smaller, scratchier handwriting, if found, return to Marcus at the butcher's. Or don't. He talks too much. You snort. Even ancient scholars needed an outlet. With the scroll carefully returned to its shelf, you thank the scribe who grunts without looking up. You step back into the light, blinking at the sudden heat. The street is louder now, more alive. A potter's wheel turns somewhere, chickens scatter across your sandals, and someone is tuning a lyre off-key. But you're somewhere else entirely, still in the quiet hush of ancient ink and cracked wisdom. Still thinking about roots. You head to a shaded fountain in a small courtyard, watching water trickle from a stone lion's mouth. Around the edge, someone scratched a message in Greek, "The gods laugh in garlic," and someone else has crossed it out and written, "Turnips are funnier. You sit." And as you watch the water shimmer, a thought drifts in like a lazy breeze. Maybe all of Rome's history, its wars, its poetry, its pomp and marble is balanced on something far simpler. Not the swords or scrolls, not the coins or columns, but on the quiet things. The things that keep growing, even underground. You spend a while at the fountain. It's the kind of quiet moment that Rome rarely allows a slice of calm tucked between chaos. The sun filters through the fig trees overhead, dappling the ground in soft gold, and a pigeon waddles up, eyes your sandal like it's made of grain, then decides you're not worth the trouble. You're not in a hurry, which is a miracle in this city. But eventually the rhythm of footsteps and gossip pulls you up again and nudges you back into the streets. Because there's still one last stop on your turnip pilgrimage. The warehouse district. Not glamorous, not charming, and definitely not on anyone's musty scroll. But vital. Because this is where the real economic veins of Rome pulse, where goods come in from the countryside and out to every corner of the empire. If you want to understand the humble turnip's place in the machinery of power, this is where you go. You wind through alleyways that smell like oil, rust, and tired dreams. Cartwheels creak over stone. Crates are hoisted, shoved, cracked open, resealed. A man with a clipboard yells about spoiled lentils. Another tries to chase down a goat that's made a break for it, bleeding like it's late for a Senate meeting. And then amid all this, a turnip cart? It's not even trying to be impressive. Just a flat wooden wagon pulled by a disinterested mule stacked high with dirt-caked roots. Some are wrapped in cloth, others still streaked with last night's rain. The merchant looks up. He's sunburned barefoot, wearing a tunic that might once have been teal but now leans aggressively toward mud. Buying or just breathing funny, he asks. You smile, learning. He grunts, cheaper than buying. You ask where the turnips came from. He nods toward the south. Lanuvium, volcanic soil. Good for grapes, better for roots. They soak in the earth's anger. Poetic, probably unintentional. He lets you help unload for a bit. It's not glamorous work. Your arms complain. Your back cracks in ways that shouldn't be legal. But there's something grounding about it. The repetition. The weight. The rhythm of work that has remained basically unchanged for thousands of years. He tells you stories as you stack about crops ruined by late frost, about wolves stealing sheep, about a traveling poet who once tried to pay for a week's worth of vegetables with a riddle. Didn't even rhyme, he says, shaking his head. Like that was the true offense. Eventually the last crate is moved and he offers you a reward. A bruised but fragrant turnip, its leaves still clinging to life. You accept it like it's a gift from Jupiter himself. And as you tuck it under your arm, he points toward a graffiti-covered wall nearby. You squint. It's a mural, faded, crumbling, but there. A crude fresco of a feast figures, reclining in the Roman-style togas draped over couches, amphorae lined up like soldiers. But in the middle of the banquet table sits not a roast pig, not a bowl of olives. A turnip, painted bright, proud, centered. You glance at the merchant. He shrugs. Old joke, he says, or maybe not. Some say it was made during a grain shortage. Others say a senator had a strange sense of humor. Historians still argue whether such murals were satirical or commemorative. Was it protest or parody? An inside joke between classes, or a reminder that even the grandest feast is built on simple ingredients? Either way, it makes you smile. Because this is what Rome is best at. Not just surviving, but remembering. Layering meaning over the mundane until it glows. You continue down the lane past stacks of amphorae and half-sung work songs until you reach the river's edge. The Tiber rolls on unbothered, uncaring. Just like always. On the opposite bank, a cluster of boys is skipping stones. One throws a turnip instead. It sinks, he cheers. You watch the ripples spread, then look down at your own root still warm from the cart, still smelling faintly of ash and garlic. This wasn't what you expected when you first asked about turnips. You thought you'd find a footnote. Instead, you found a thread, running through kitchens and temples, battles and banquets, winding through graffiti and poems, dinners and dreams. And you think maybe this is why Rome built so many monuments. Not because it needed the glory, but because the city knew how easily people forget what really matters. The small things. The quiet things. The things that feed you when the rest of the world is trying to starve you. You sit again this time on a low wall near the docks, feet dangling just above the dirt. The sun hangs lower now, gilding the crates, casting long shadows. A worker passes with a basket full of garlic. Another carries a bundle of leeks so large it looks like he's fighting a shrub. And somewhere in all this clamor and motion, a turnip gets sliced, pickled, stewed, roasted, worshipped. It lives on not just as a vegetable, but as a reminder. That endurance isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just persistent. As twilight fades into something softer and darker, Rome takes on a new texture. The edges blur. The noise softens. The heat seeps from the stones, rising in gentle waves that smell faintly of citrus and wood ash. You're no longer walking so much as drifting a leaf on the current of the city's slow exhale. You pass under an arch lit by torchlight and emerge into a smaller square where the cobbles are uneven and the lamplight flickers in puddles left by a leaky aqueduct. There's music coming from somewhere, a flute perhaps, or just someone humming through their teeth with enough conviction to be mistaken for art. And there, tucked between a dye cellar and a spice booth, you find the last unexpected stop of the day. A tiny tavern. Not grand, not famous, not even well signed, but it's glowing with the promise of warmth and wine and whatever counts as comfort food for the night crowd. Inside, it's cozy chaos. Low ceilings, wood beams stained with age and ambition, a fire crackling behind an iron grate. Every table is packed with locals, off-duty guards nursing sore feet, merchants counting coins, scribes doodling in the margins of their own boredom. You slip into a seat near the hearth, and before you can even ask, a dish is placed in front of you. Turnip stew. Of course. It steams gently, smells like garlic and patience, and contains what you're pretty sure is a generous chunk of goat. The man across from you, gray beard, cracked knuckles, and the grin of someone who's survived 3 wars and 1 very bad love affair raises his bowl to you. Best eaten slow, he says, like revenge. You smile, he slurps. No one corrects him. The barkeep is a woman with arms strong enough to break amphora, and a voice that could probably stop the Senate mid-debate. She moves like she owns the night slinging stew, shouting for more cups, and occasionally humming a lullaby under her breath. You ask her why she serves turnip stew every night. She shrugs. Because it works. And that's it, isn't it? It works. It doesn't dazzle or impress. It doesn't sparkle. It just shows up, does the job, fills the belly, and leaves room for wine. Like a good friend. Or a halfway decent senator. Or Rome when it's not busy collapsing under its own ambition. The old man leans closer. Used to eat this every week on campaign, he says. Boiled it over campfire in a pot we called the Emperor. You raise an eyebrow. Because it ruled us, he adds. And because it always stuck around whether we liked it or not. He chuckles. You join him. The fire pops. Someone spills wine and curses in Greek. The music drifts in again, this time clearly a flute swooning sleepy, shaped like nostalgia. You think about how many people have sat in places like this over centuries with turnip in their bowls and stories in their mouths. How many decisions were made with a spoon in hand? How many arguments ended not with a sword but a shared meal? Historians still argue whether Roman taverns were democratic spaces or cesspools of vice. But what's certain is that they were places where stories fermented just as much as wine, and where the humblest food like turnips became background noise to history. You look down at your half-empty bowl and wonder how something so basic became the unlikely thread running through everything you've seen. It's not just a vegetable anymore. It's a lens, a mirror, a slow-boiled truth. Your spoon scrapes the bottom of the bowl, and the barkeep replaces it with a small clay cup of warm honey wine. You raise it without thinking. To Rome, the old man says. You add to turnips. He nods solemnly, and to stomachs stronger than our patience. You sip, and for a while there's no need to say anything else. Just fire. Laughter. Shadows flickering like gossip on the walls. Someone sings a lullaby in a language older than Latin. A cat jumps onto a bench and makes itself very unwelcome. And the turnip? It lingers in the pot, in the air, in your bones. Not as something flashy, not even as something particularly tasty, but as something honest, resilient, a little weird, entirely Roman. You step back outside when the night deepens, the air cooler now and tinged with cypress and damp marble. Your breath ghosts in front of you in tiny clouds. The moon hangs like a coin dropped in a bowl of ink. And as you walk, turnip full and heart a little strange, you feel something settle in you. Like you've uncovered a joke that was always waiting. A secret that everyone knew but never thought to say out loud. You pass a statue of a forgotten general, his face worn down by rain and pigeons. You wonder if he ever cursed the taste of stew after 3 weeks in a row. Probably. You round another corner and see it on a doorframe scratched in with a knife or a nail. Or maybe a particularly determined snail. Rapa vincit. The turnip conquers. You nod. Of course it does. You wake the next morning with sunlight crawling up the wall, stretching golden fingers across chipped plaster and worn mosaic tiles. Rome hums beyond the window, less like a lion now, and more like a cranky rooster flapping and fussing and declaring the day whether anyone asked for it or not. But you're still in the quiet in between. 1 foot in sleep, 1 in memory. And somewhere tucked behind your thoughts is the taste of turnip stew and the sound of laughter that didn't need to be clever to feel full. You sit up slowly, stretch until your spine offers a dozen tiny objections, and glance over at the lump of yesterday's turnip, still wrapped in cloth, resting on the table like a sleepy relic. It smells faintly of time and ash and ambition. You smile. Not many vegetables can do that. Outside, the streets come alive again. Merchants yelling about figs and salted fish. A child chases a chicken into a bakery. A philosopher argues with a mule. The city doesn't care about your reflections, it moves regardless. which is what makes it Rome. Today, you don't have a mission, not a dinner party, not a market errand, just a little time left to wander to let your steps be guided not by maps, but by impulse. You find yourself drifting through the Subura, where laundry hangs between tenement windows like prayer flags of survival. Through the campus Martius, where bored guards play dice beside cracked statues. You stop at a fountain shaped like Neptune's elbow and take a drink so cold it makes your teeth ache and your soul thank you. And eventually you find your way to a garden you've never noticed before. Small, walled in, nothing fancy. Just rows of vegetables and a carved bench and an old man hunched over a plot with more devotion than you've seen in most temples. He doesn't look up as you approach. You nod. He grunts. And then without a word, he points to a patch of earth where stubby green stalks push through the soil like stubborn fingers. Rapa, he says, turnips. You sit beside him. The sun is warm. The dirt smells like something patient. The world for a moment forgets to demand anything of you. He tells you eventually that this garden used to be his brother's. That when the Republic trembled and taxes rose and generals bickered like spoiled children, his brother planted turnips. Not grapes, not flowers. Turnips. Because they stay, he says, when everything else goes. You nod. Historians still argue whether gardens like this were common or rare, sacred or silly. But you know this, they mattered. Not because they changed the world, but because they held it together root by root. You help him pull one from the soil round misshapen a little shy. He holds it up like an offering, like a reminder. And you know it's time. Time to return. Not from Rome exactly, but from this slow journey through the unlikely heart of a city built on stone and stubbornness. So, you walk back through narrow lanes past cats on rooftops and bakers with arms dusted in flour. You pause to buy one last loaf of bread coarse warm wrapped in fig leaves and tuck the turnip into your satchel like a relic. One last glance at the forum at the hills rising in the distance at the layers of life stacked like amphorae in a cellar. And then you return to your room, sit by the window, and watch the city shift from afternoon to amber. The turnip waits on the sill. You think of everything its meant sustenance, survival, satire symbol, and you realize something, in all its weirdness, it told the truth. About Rome. About you. About how history is more than emperors and epics. It's also vegetables and vices and very strange dinner parties. And maybe there's a kind of peace in that. So you settle into your chair, the air cool against your skin, and close your eyes for a moment of stillness. The kind that lingers. The kind that roots. Wind down 300 words. The city is quiet now. The sky has gone soft, a dusky lavender melting into indigo, and the rooftops glow with the last traces of gold. Somewhere in the distance, a lyre sings a single note before giving into silence. The pigeons have tucked themselves into eaves. The dogs have curled into alleyway dreams. And Rome exhales once more, wrapping itself in the warmth of its own memory. You sit there, eyes half closed, letting the weight of the day fall away, bit by bit, breath by breath. No more turnip poetry. No more roasted rodent delicacies. Just you and the hush between footsteps and the soft hush of night rising. Maybe you're still holding that turnip. Or maybe it rests beside you like a quiet joke no one needs to explain anymore. Either way, it's done its job. It showed up. It stayed. It reminded you that history doesn't always arrive with trumpets. It sometimes sneaks in through the back door carrying a stew pot and a grin. And as the stars blink into place one by one like ancient stories being rewritten on velvet, you feel something settle deep in your chest. A calm, a knowing. A sense that the world is wide and weird and somehow always more wonderful than we give it credit for. So rest now. Let your thoughts drift like olive leaves on a fountain surface. Let your breath slow. Let your body soften. Let your dreams tiptoe in like shy visitors. You've earned it. Sleep well, noble traveler. Sleep well, root historian.